John lifted Rukan up quickly, embracing the boy in greeting, before allowing him to run off to his mother, who had only just exited the carriage. Sangza John continued down the line, unsure of what the girl's reaction would be to him. They had never been close, her mother's displeasure with his presence a learned grudge. To his surprise, Sangza reached out and embraced him. "I'm glad that you are safe," she said, before pulling back. "Is Rob well?" Knowing that Rob was in the process of assaulting Casterly Rock, John was tactful in his reply. "He was well when I left him. He's a married man now, with a babe on the way. Queen Margari is there with your mother. I'm sure she could use a friend around here to get acclimated to life in Winterfell." John could see Sangza's eyes light up as she glanced to where Margari stood, being introduced to Rukan. "Go ahead. We'll have more time to catch up later." Sangza nodded and moved swiftly to her mother, leaving John alone with Bran. He moved over and took a knee in front of Bran's chair, reaching out and gripping the boy's hand. "I can't say how good it is to see you. The last time I was here, we didn't know if you would ever wake. Maybe the better if I hadn't," Bran drawled. "Don't say that," John stated, his voice commanding. "You've been dealt a blow, there is no doubt, Bran, but there are other things still left for you. That fall may have taken your legs, but it did not take your mind. You'll find your place in the world, even if it isn't as a knight." "If you say so," disbelief clear in Bran's voice. "I do, and Rob will tell you the exact same when he arrives." John stood and affectionately ruffled the boy's hair. A new face had appeared behind Bran, in the grinning figure of Sir Roderick. John walked behind Bran and embraced Winterfell's master-at-arms. "Good to have you home," John Roderick stated. "It's good to be home. And a true Stark now, from what I hear." You've heard true. For what it's worth, you always were, royal decree or not. Heard you Stark boys were causing some distress to those fucking lions down south." "Just a bit," John grinned. "When I left, Rob was on his way to take Casterly Rock from them." "Truly?" Sir Roderick asked, astonishment on his face. "Well, that is sure to ruffle some golden feathers. Though, I'm surprised you agreed to come back, and not take part." "Yes, well, there are some disadvantages to having a king for a brother," John frowned. "Turns out you can't just tell them to shove it when they decide something stupid." "And what is it he wants you to do?" "Get control over what is happening beyond the wall," John responded. "Uncle Benjen has disappeared, and we've been getting ravens from the Lord Commander requesting aid. I'm really only escorting the Queen, Lady Catelyn and Arya back here before I set off again. There are 3,000 men camped outside the castle to reinforce the watch." "Those wildings have been a constant problem," Roderick growled. "There have been no less than 15 reports of raids since Lady Catelyn rode south. Just 2 days ago we engaged a group of 20, biggest one we've seen." "Are they dead?" "Most, but we managed to subdue a few. They're in the dungeons. Those bastards did a number on us as well. Came back with 10 less men than we brought." "Have you questioned them?" "Tried, but their lips are shut tighter than a bride at her bedding. I was waiting to dispense with them until Lady Catelyn returned, but it seems that decision may be best left to you or our new queen now. Don't execute them yet. I may try to have words with them myself. A little perspective never hurts. Good luck." "The male wilding with the red hair looks like he would eat your flesh if you looked at him the wrong way." "What I would like to know is how so many are getting this far south," John muttered. "The Boltons are supposed to be maintaining our northern border. Have they been in correspondence?" "None recently," Roderick answered. "Though, there have been rumors of the Bolton bastard causing trouble from some of the folks passing through Wintertown. Ned should have put his foot down on that menace years ago." "One problem at a time," Sir Roderick John sighed. "I'll add him to my list. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX opted to return to his former chamber. There was a comfort in familiarity, and he did not feel like making a fuss in the short time he would be staying. After resting for a brief time and indulging in a hearty meal, he allowed himself the pleasure of a warm bath. Adequately refreshed, he put on a fresh set of clothes, and made his way down to the dungeons. There was only one guard standing in place at the entrance, and John waved him away to leave him alone with the prisoners. There were only 3 in total, one big man, with a giant red beard, whose eyes were wild. Across from the male wilderling, sitting with her knees tucked to her chest, was a woman with equally striking red hair and blue eyes. She was young, around his own age, and she looked nothing like he expected a wilderling to look like. She wasn't beautiful in the way that Sansa was, but still, there was something about her that drew his eyes to her. He forced his eyes away briefly to the prone figure of the 3rd wilderling, who looked to have succumbed to injuries. Jon slowly approached the cell and gripped the rusted, iron bars. "What are your names?" Jon questioned. "Haven't seen you before," the male wilderling stated. "Did they think if they sent someone prettier, we'd talk?" "I've only just arrived back to the castle, and heard we had uninvited guests," Jon responded. "Shame if this is the way they treat guests in the south," the man said. "Firstly, this isn't the south. Secondly, if it was, you certainly would not still be alive. So we should be grateful, is that it?" The young woman spoke for the first time, her voice drawing Jon's attention instantly. "And who do we have to thank for such fine treatment?" "My name is Jon Stark." "Stark, you related to Benjen Stark?" the man asked. "He is, my uncle," Jon stated. "Had many run-ins with Benjen Stark over the years," the man noted. "His brother was an important lord." "Ned Stark?" "He was my father," Jon stated. "Was? He was killed in battle a short time ago. So does that make you Lord Stark now?" "No. That title falls to my brother, Robb. Who also happens to be the king in the north." "And what does that make you?" the woman asked. "The brother of the king. Why not kill your brother and become king?" the woman needled. "Because I love my brother, and I think he is a good king. Family is important to us. We don't do things the way wildlings do, which is why you are sitting in these cells right now. Raiding and killing innocent men, women and children carries a sentence of death. What you call what those fucking crows do to us, Jon Stark? Those crows have been killing us for years, just for existing. You kept us trapped beyond your big, fancy wall, but that wasn't good enough. Do you know how many of our men, women and children the crows have killed?" "I don't," Jon answered, honestly. "Thousands," the woman exclaimed. "I can't speak for what the Night's Watch has done," Jon said. "But I can say that the attacks on my people will not be tolerated. Why is it that all of a sudden wildlings are coming down in droves, especially if all you wish is to be left alone?" "You know nothing, Jon Stark," the woman sniped. "You know nothing of what's coming. You sit in your nice castle, while we fight against the storm that's coming. And what is it that's coming? Things that would make you crawl and hide in your bed like a babe. We're not coming south because we like you kneelers. It's because we don't have a choice. Have you ever seen a man rise from the dead, pretty man?" the male wildling asked. "I haven't." "Well, I have. A whole army of them in the north is gathering, waiting to attack. They've preyed on our clans, picking at us. Every wilderling that falls to them joins their ranks, hundreds of thousands of them." Jon found it hard to believe that an army of 100,000 dead men were coming, but for some reason the look in the man's eyes made the claim seem sincere. "What is it exactly that your people want?" "Protection, to not be prisoners stuck between the White Walkers to the north and the wall to the south," the male wilderling answered. "You want passage through the wall?" "We do, Jon Stark," the woman confirmed. "And if you Southerners won't let us, then we'll climb your wall and come anyway. You do realize, though, in fairness you actually may not, that even though there are multiple kingdoms at war with each other presently, the one thing that would likely unite us in common purpose would be to repel an army of wildlings from invading our castles," Jon stated, though truthfully he doubted the reality of his own assertion. "The Lannisters would still likely see the Starks dead first. You have your king, Jon Stark, and now the free folk have theirs," the woman said. "Mance Rayder, the king beyond the wall, has united the clans. 100,000 free folk are marching south, and they are much more frightened of the White Walkers and their army than of those fool crows at Castle Black. Mance sent us scouting, which is why we were south of the wall. When Ygritte asked whether you would kill your brother for his crown, you said you wouldn't do it because you loved him," the man continued. "Well, I have sons and daughters, Stark, and I love them just like you love your brother. What am I to do?" Should I sit and wait for the others to have them? Would you wait for them to take your family? The only difference between us, is that you live safely tucked behind your wall, while we're penned in like animals waiting for slaughter. Do you really think your people who built that wall hundreds of feet high, built it to keep some free folk from raiding your lands? The girl, Ygritte, questioned. My ancestor built the wall thousands of years ago, Jon noted. I can't rightly say his true purpose for building it, but I know the stories and the legends. You can't escape them being raised here. They aren't just stories, boy, the man stated. If you don't believe me, I'll escort you north and introduce you to the others' leader, the Night King, myself. That'll change your fucking mind. We'll likely end up walking corpses, but my point would be proven all the same. What do you say, Jon Stark? Are you man enough to travel beyond the wall? Ygritte smirked. I'll decline the invitation to meet this Night King, for the moment, Jon stated. However, I would be agreeable to meeting with your king beyond the wall. Would he be willing to meet with me, is the question, without killing me afterwards, preferably. As long as you don't bring any crows with you, the wildling man noted. I may be able to guarantee your safety, for the sake of a meeting. Good, Jon responded. It just so happens I am on my way to the wall. Jon looked over the woman. You know my name, and I know that she is Ygritte, but what do they call you? Tormund Giantsbane, the wildling man answered, pride in his name evident as he puffed out his chest. Don't ask him why he calls himself that, it ends with him fucking a bear. Ygritte sighed, leaning her head back against the stone wall. Since we're friends now, will you let us out of this cell? She smiled seductively at him, running a hand down her front. You're a pretty one. I wouldn't say no to sharing your bed for the night. I've never fucked the brother of a king before. Me as well. Tormund grinned and winked. I don't think I'm quite ready for that yet, Jon responded, though the image of the woman sharing his bed was briefly stuck in his head. I will have someone come and see to your fallen man and make sure that you're warm and fed until I'm ready to set out, which won't be long. Fair enough, Jon Stark. Tormund shrugged. You're not as much of a fool as I thought you'd be, for a kneeler. We both serve kings, Jon countered. I kneel because I respect my king, not because he makes me. Whether your king makes you kneel or not, you still serve him. Just as he finished talking, a white figure stalked into the dungeons. Ghost took a seat at Jon's side, allowing him run his hand along his head. The two prisoners were clearly surprised at the animal's presence. You have a dire wolf? Ygritte asked. I do, as do all of my siblings. There are 6 in total. And they just wander freely? Tormund questioned. Their mother died, and we've raised them since they were small pups, Jon explained. I've never seen a tame direwolf like that. Maybe there is some true north in you Starks after all, Tormund mused. I wouldn't call them tame, Jon corrected, looking down into Ghost's muzzle. I've seen them tear a man's face off in battle, rip their insides open. That's good, Stark. Tormund smiled. You'll need every advantage you can get when the others come, and they will come. Winter is coming, Jon reflexively stated. Aye, it's coming, boy. And you better be ready for it when it does. Chapter 30, Chapter 30. Chapter text. They had lingered at Winterfell for only several days before continuing the journey north. Jon had been anxious at the reaction to releasing the wildling prisoners, but had only met slight resistance. Sir Roderick had briefly blustered at seeing Tormund and Ygritte free, both now washed and dressed in clean, northern garb. Jon found it remarkable, how with just a simple set of clothing, the two could easily pass for members of a northern household. While Jon had noted that the presence of the wildlings was necessary, he had intentionally withheld his intent to travel with them beyond the wall, and into the hands of the enemy, that would wait until the right time. Before leaving, he had been sure to see to it that affairs in Winterfell were settled. While he had grown up in the castle, he had never been groomed to run it the way that Robb had, and was somewhat out of his element when it came to such matters. Jon had sat for numerous meetings with Maester Lewyn, Lady Catelyn and Queen Margaery to discuss their winter stores and impending flood of people who would be seeking shelter from the weather in Wintertown. Jon was truly in awe of their new queen, for though she was a novice in the ways of northern life, she made her strong opinions known without reservation. The castle inhabitants had all taken to her quickly as well. The night before they were to set out, the Stark family joined together for a private meal in the Great Hall. It was no feast, but for Jon, being in the presence of so much of his family for the first time in many months, it was revitalizing, it was enough. The weight of Ned Stark's permanent absence from the castle was felt, as was Robb's, but the new additions provided a cause for lightness. Shireen Baratheon had initially been quite reserved, but had quickly learned that her new guardians were kind and unaffected by the scars on her face. Margaery had taken special interest to see to the girl's care, and to Jon's surprise, she and Arya got on well. Having spent years sequestered under the strict rule of Stannis, Arya's disdain for social norms was likely a refreshing change of pace. The memory of the peaceful evening kept in Jon's mind as his horse carried him north along the King's Road, and into the heart of the Wolf's Wood. The road narrowed, and as he looked back, he saw their men compressed into a long line that stretched at least a mile back. Hellman Tallheart and Robin Flint were riding behind him, while the wildlings, Tormund and Ygritte, rode a pace ahead, where Jon could keep his eyes on them. If Jon had not known where the two wildlings came from, he would have thought the modest pair of traveling companions. Tormund refused to be quiet, speaking of his many unbelievable exploits beyond the wall, while Ygritte would constantly look back at Jon, giving him flirtatious and lecherous looks, forcing him to adjust himself in the saddle. They marched at a steady pace through the morning and late into the afternoon, with the only delay a broken wheel on one of the baggage carts. Eventually, the forest to the east began to thin, and Jon could see edge of the icy long lake peeking through. He had intended to make camp at the northern edge of the lake, but then Tormund's voice alerted him. Smoke ahead, the wildling noted, pointing to a swirl of black wisps emerging above the trees. There are fishing villages along the lake, Jon advised, though the sight gave him pause. His disquiet was proven justified as the plumes became thicker, and the acrid smell began to fill his nose. Those aren't mere cook fires, Hellman Tallheart stated. Likely more wilderling savages causing trouble, Robin Flint growled. Doubt it, Tormund countered. Not like us to burn villages and draw attention to ourselves. I don't know what it is, but it's likely not anything good, Jon interjected. He turned his horse around to face his men. Whomever it is, they won't be expecting us, so we should set upon them quickly. Sir Hellman and I will lead a force of horse against them, while Lord Flint follows and organizes the remainder of the men. The forest opens in a short distance, so form the men into lines. And what of us, Stark? Ygritte questioned, drawing Jon's attention from behind. Looking into the forest, he whistled and then called out, "Ghost." After only a few moments, a rustling was heard in the depths of the forest, followed by the appearance of the White Wolf. Jon looked back at Ygritte. You two stay with the rest of the army. Ghost, if they try to run, hunt. The dire wolf turned his piercing gaze towards the two wildlings. Tormund gave him a wry grin, barely discernible through the thick beard. And here I thought we were friends. Not wasting any more time on banter, Jon drew his sword. He and 50 riders rode hard, their horses' hooves beating against the frigid earth, the sound echoing through the forest. The smoke grew thicker and thicker, until finally Jon could see orange flames flickering ahead. When the forest finally opened into a clearing, the sight that met them was nothing but destruction and carnage. The village itself was small, but still made up of over 20 stone-walled dwellings. However, while the walls were stone, the rooftops were made of straw and sticks, and most were now burning. There was no movement, and the clearing was silent, but for the crackling of the flames. With no immediate threat in sight, Jon brought his horse to a halt. He slid from his mount, and slowly made his way into the heart of the village. It did not take long to find the first corpse, then the second, and a third. The villagers had been utterly slaughtered, hacked, sliced, pierced with arrows, and apparently mauled by hounds by the looks of some of the gruesome wounds. Men, women and children lay dead. Jon's grip on his sword was fierce as both rage and despair overtook him. The lifeless eyes of a boy younger than Rickon was sure to haunt his sleep. He knelt and closed the poor boy's eyes. Jon. He looked over to where Hellman Tallheart stood, staring intently at something. Jon arose from his knees and walked slowly over. Immediately he had to fight the bile that threatened to rise from his gut. Attached to a tree, 2 boards had been nailed into the shape of an X. Affixed to the boards with nails, was the stretched body of a woman. Her dead eyes were wide, as was her mouth, in an everlasting scream of unimaginable agony. Every single bit of skin below her neck had been peeled away, flayed. The bloody sight of exposed muscle was sickening, and John was fighting every reflex to retch. This wasn't wildlings, John snarled. This was fucking Boltons. This is madness, Tallheart stated, shaking his head. Roose Bolton is a frigid cunt, but I can't believe he'd be so foolish or reckless to do something like this. Just as he was about to respond, John spotted movement behind a tree in the distance. He was about to raise his sword and alert the others, but then the figure became clearer, and he could see that it was a child, crouched and huddled into a ball. Sheathing his weapon, he approached slowly, trying not to alarm them. Even when he was just steps away, the child remained, seemingly in shock, tracks of tears streaming down their face. It was a girl, likely not yet in her teens. Her dirty, brunette hair was singed in many places, as was her ruddy, threadbare dress. Her arms were exposed to the elements, and John could see her shivering violently. Reaching for the clasp of his cloak, he pulled it from his shoulders and wrapped it around the girl. "Can you tell me your name?" John asked, his voice gentle as he crouched down to the young girl's level. At first she did not respond, but then her bloodshot eyes raised to his. "Amira," she stated, her voice wavering. "Amira," John repeated. "My name is John Stark." "Do you know the Starks?" The girl nodded. "They are our lord. I've been to Winterfell, with my family." At the mention of her family, her voice broke into a sob. "Well, my brother Robb is Lord Stark now, and he is also king in the north. He's sent me here to help you." "Does that mean you're a prince?" the girl asked, a peak of wonder behind her devastated eyes. "I suppose it does," John replied, offering a comforting smile. "Can you tell me what happened here?" They said they wanted our winter stores, and our horses," the girl whispered. We gave them what we could, but then they attacked, they killed my family, and I ran." "I'm so sorry, Amira," John consoled. "Do you know who it was that attacked you? Were they carrying banners or wearing a sigil on their clothing?" "The flayed man, Lord," the girl answered. "It was the Boltons. They've come before, taking what they please, even the women, call it attacks for their protection." "And do you know who was leading them?" John questioned. "He called himself Ramsay Bolton, Lord." Taking a steadying breath, John reached under the child's arms and easily pulled her to her feet. He pulled his fine fur cloak tighter around the girl. "You've been very brave, Amira. I'm going to make sure that justice is done for what's happened to your family." She nodded, fighting back another sob. "Thank you, Lord. Will you take me with you? I don't have anywhere to go." "You won't be able to travel with us," John said. "It's going to be much too dangerous where we're headed. But you'll be going somewhere much safer. Some of my men are going to escort you back to Winterfell, where you'll be looked after." "Do you know how to ride?" "Yes, Lord. My father taught me." "Good. We'll get you your own horse, and you'll be on your way to get fed and warmed, away from all of this. When I get back to Winterfell, I'll be sure to come check on you." Once Amira was safely on her way, John once again found himself walking through the destroyed village, his anger building as his men saw to the fires and bodies. He watched as Robin Flint and Hellman Tallheart approach, waiting for him to speak his mind. "This cannot stand," John stated. "We've all heard the rumors about Ramsay, but this goes beyond cruel mischief. This is murder, and it must be answered for. I'll have his head for this." "Should we not seek the king's guidance on this matter?" Lord Flint asked, his tone cautious. "Robb is not here, but he sent me north with the full weight of his authority. I will not wait to act while our people are being slaughtered like livestock. We do not know what else has been going on here while we have been south. This may just be but one example of many. Confronting Roose Bolton on this may lead to war," another war Hellman Tallheart spoke. "Roose has no other heir, so asking for the boy's head will not be met well." "We all must bear the consequences of our actions," John responded. "My father would have never let this stand, no matter whose son it was. If Roose wants a war, then so be it. Not to put a damper on that sentiment, but the Boltons would likely field a larger force than we have at the moment," Robin Flint cautioned. "And the Dread Fort itself is no simple conquest. They could simply hole up inside and wait us out." A siege in the middle of winter is not sustainable this far north. Jon knew that he was right. The Dread Fort was formidable, and the numbers were not with them. Robb had tasked him with providing support for the Night's Watch, but this could not simply be ignored. Lord Flint, get 3 of your best archers and get them ready to travel with all haste. Have them remove anything from their person that could identify their allegiance in the event they are caught. Where will they be going? To the Dread Fort, Jon responded. I don't trust that this is simply Ramsay causing trouble. I want to know what Roose Bolton is scheming. The girl said something curious. What was it? Flint questioned. It may be nothing, but she said that Ramsay called himself Ramsay Bolton. He's a well-known bastard, and the only way he could have been legitimized would be by order of a king. I would know. There's no chance it was done on Robb's command. Which would mean Roose is corresponding with another king. It could just be the boy spouting nonsense, Hellman Tallheart noted. If he's capable of this type of outrage, lying would mean little to him. Could be, but I can't just let it go. Tell the archers that they are to shoot down every raven traveling to, or coming out of the Dread Fort. The rest of the men will camp here for the time being. Form a defensive perimeter and dig in, just in case they come back this way. What of the issue of numbers? Tallheart asked. It would take weeks to get additional men from the Riverlands. We may be able to scrounge a few from Last Hearth or Sawin, but not enough to make a difference. No, we'll leave them be, Jon stated, beginning the walk back towards his horse. If Bolton has any thoughts to move against other northern houses, I'd not pull any away from their remaining defenses. My plan is to ride west into the Wolfswood to seek out the mountain clans. Between the Liddles, Vulls, and Nerys, I can probably add another 1,000 fighters, if not more. I had thought to seek out their services to aid at the wall, regardless. Those clansmen are just as likely to fight amongst themselves than they are the Boltons, Tallheart remarked, clearly dissatisfied at the thought of fighting alongside the rugged mountain dwellers. They'll answer the call of their king, Jon replied. They might not be the most polished of peoples, but they know how to fight. He pulled himself up on his mount, preparing himself for a long ride into the night. He gave a final look to his commanders. The men are yours. It would be a good idea to have them start crafting ladders. If we need to lay siege to the Dread Fort, we should be prepared. You don't mean to go alone, do you? Lord Flint asked. The woods are treacherous, especially at night. The king would have our heads for allowing you to set out on your own. I grew up riding and hunting these woods, Jon countered. I'll move faster on my own, and I won't truly be alone. Any man or beast who would mean to accost me will think twice at Ghost's presence. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX. Robb Stark had laid in his bed in Casterly Rock for hours, but any of hope of a restful slumber eluded him. The stress of kingship was starting to wear on him, and he dearly missed the comforting embrace of his queen. He had expected to be gone from the pretentious home of the Lannisters weeks ago, but the houses still loyal to the Lannisters were proving a thorn in his side. There were 2 mountain passes in the Westerlands, one through the Golden Tooth entering into the Riverlands and the other along the Gold Road leading to the Crownlands and King's Landing. Despite being besieged on 2 sides, House Lefford refused to surrender the Tooth, and Houses Brax and Leiden had created a makeshift blockage along the Gold Road preventing safe passage. Robb's patience was wearing thinner and thinner as each additional day went by. He longed to be back in Winterfell again. He did not want to miss the birth of his firstborn. Claps of thunder and flashes of lightning outside his windows were the final straw in his efforts for rest. Rising from his bed, wearing only a pair of breeches, he walked to his solar, where maps and troop positions were laid out. He stared down at them, his thoughts racing with plausible ideas on how to quickly break the sieges. Though he had heard nothing more from the Lannisters since taking their castle, which was worrying in itself, he still felt that if he could secure the Westerlands, a trip back to Winterfell would be manageable. His musings on battle strategy were broken by a sound outside his door, at least he thought that was where it had come from. Thunder was still rattling in the distance, so it may have been nothing. However, a moment later, there was another thump outside his door. Sighing, he stood from his chair. If he had to guess, one of his night guards had managed to fall asleep and slid down the wall. As Rob opened the door to his solar, ready to lecture the guard on his duties, a flicker of torchlight glinted off a steel dagger that was heading swiftly towards Rob's heart. He managed to turn at the last moment, but the dagger pierced Rob's bare arm midway above the elbow, lodging itself in the muscle. Rob stumbled backwards, landing on his backside. He looked down and saw that the dagger had remained embedded in his arm, blood freely flowing down all the way to his palm. Realizing he was still in danger, he looked up and saw two figures make their way into his solar, closing his door behind them. Rob's eyes blaze with fury as he sees Black Walder Free and his younger brother Petter standing above him, their swords drawn, blood already dripping down the blades, likely that of his guards. "Never trust a fucking Free," Rob muttered, grimacing as he pulled the dagger from his arm. "I'm going to hang every one of you traitorous, inbred fucks from the ramparts your own castle and leave you there until the crows scavenge every piece of rotten flesh from you bones." "It will be hard to do that, seeing as you'll be dead," Black Walder responded. "Who put you up to this?" Rob questioned, though he was sure he could guess. Black Walder smirked. "There are many who would pay to see the king in the north dead. Let's just say our loyalty didn't come cheap. There will be a new Lord Paramount of the Trident soon enough. Now, let's make this quick, Your Grace. Give yourself an easy death." Rob stood quickly as Black Walker approached, sword raised. Rob reached behind and grabbed a wine jug off his table, throwing it at the man's head with staggering force. Black Walder's sword intercepted the jug, but it exploded into pieces, the shards embedding into the Fri's face. Petter Free tried to go to his brother's aid, but Rob did not give him a chance. Taking the dagger recovered from his arm, he rushed the younger Free, bodily shoving him back into a stone wall and shoving the blade into his neck. Blood spurted from the wound as Petter dropped his sword and reached for his neck, trying to plug the hole. Rob picked up the man's sword and in one vicious swipe detached head from neck. A scream from behind gave Rob warning, but he wasn't fast enough as Black Walder slashed his exposed back. The cut was deep, and Rob wanted to scream in pain, but held it back, his eyes watering. The blood from his arm was still flowing, and he was having trouble gripping his sword. Black Walder's scarred face bristled with rage as he swung again. Rob deflected the blow and lunged with his own attack, slicing his opponent in this thigh, causing him to drop to his knees. Rob was exercising on no sleep and was rapidly losing blood. He stumbled slightly as he walked forward, but gathered his remaining strength into a mighty horizontal swing. Black Walder blocked, but the force of Rob's attack disarmed the man, leaving him defenseless. In a pitch of reckless rage, Rob dropped his sword, raised his fist and began to pummel Black Walder's face, over and over and over, until the man's nose was concave and eye was bulged from the socket. Rob's other hand gripped Black Walker by the hair, refusing to let him fall to the ground as the strikes continued. The pitiful man sobbed as blood and snot poured down his ruined visage. Not satisfied, Rob gripped the man by his cloaked shoulders, and dragged him over to his solar's smoldering fireplace. Without any bit of remorse, Rob threw Black Walder in. The flames were quick to eat at the Fri's cloak, and soon enough were traveling over the length of his body. Black Walder screamed and flailed, trying everything to extricate himself, but Rob's foot on his side would not allow. Black Walder's fight only served to spread the flames faster, and soon his skin was blistering and melting away. Rob stepped back and watched the traitor die. Weak, and chilled from the loss of blood, Rob stumbled to his door and pulled it open, desperate to get help. If the Freys had been plotting, they were likely to sabotage his other forces, and he needed to protect his men before it was too late. Lying on the ground, bleeding from multiple wounds, was Rob's guard, Oliver Free. His eyes were lifeless. The poor boy had been murdered by his own kin. Rob made it down several hallways, but soon his adrenaline was gone, and he fell, leaning against a wall. His vision swam in and out. As he finally lost conciseness, the last sounds he heard were screams and the clash of steel. Chapter 31, Chapter 31. Chapter text. When Rob came to consciousness once more, he was lying on his stomach on his bed. It was eerily quiet, but he had little time to ponder the silence as the wound on his back throbbed and stung painfully. He bit into the bedding to stop himself from crying out, until he was able to slowly acclimate to the intense level of pain. Slowly, he turned his head and saw a disheveled, battle-weary Theon, seated in a chair against the wall. Theon's hair was matted and his face was smeared with ash and blood. Large black bags evidencing a lack of sleep were obvious beneath his eyes. "It's good see you awake," Theon remarked, clearly noticing Rob's resumed movement. "You looked a right bloody mess when I left you." The phrase "Our traitors," Theon finished. "Figured that out rather quickly when I found you unconscious in the hole with Black Walder's smoking corpse in your hearth." "How did you find me?" "That would be thanks to him." Theon pointed towards the door, and Rob could see Grey Wind, sat back on his haunches, staring unblinkingly at the door to his bedchamber as if expecting a threat to burst through at any moment. "I'm not really sure what's happened, but he must have sensed you were in trouble, and went absolutely unhinged. He was howling so loud it echoed through the entire keep, didn't stop until I found you. My ears are still ringing from the sound." "What happened after?" Rob asked. "I heard fighting outside right before I went out. The Free soldiers launched an attack against our camp. But they put too much faith in Black Walder succeeding with his assassination attempt. They left the rear of their force exposed. Black Walder had left a small force at the entrance to the keep, who they were expecting to join them after they killed you. And I made sure that didn't happen. No. After I was sure you secured, I rallied what men I could from inside the keep and we took them by surprise. Then we marched down and smashed the rest of the Freys from behind." "How bad were our losses?" "At least 200 dead, more wounded," Theon stated. "They took us unaware, it could have been much worse." "What of the Freys?" Theon frowned, his eyes dark. "Let's just say, the men didn't take well to betrayal. Once we surprised them from behind, we tore through them like warmed butter. There may be close to 100 left, if that. We have them rounded up in livestock pens." Rob winced as he painfully rolled his legs over the edge of the bed, managing to shift until he was sitting up. "Have the men build execution blocks. We're going to send every single Free head back to Lord Walder. Then I'm going to tear down his castle, stone by stone, then rebuild it again with his corpse as the mortar." Rob's anger slightly waned when he saw the conflicted look on Theon's face. "What else? You're holding something back." Theon hesitated for a moment, reluctance clear on his face. "The attack by the Freys wasn't isolated. While they were busy betraying us, our ships were attacked by a force from the sea." Rob frowned, perplexed, but then the obvious answer came to him. The inner turmoil evident from Theon's countenance quickly confirmed it. The Ironborn had attacked them. "How much damage?" Rob questioned. "Several ships were sunk. Another dozen took on minor damage, but are still floating. The ships guarding the bay held strong, and were reinforced once the Freys were subdued. On any other day I would write off the attack as the Ironborn doing what is in their nature, but the Freys attacking at the same moment is no coincidence. The Lannisters are desperate and buying allies wherever they can," Rob concluded. "It can't be coincidence," Theon agreed. "I don't like being so isolated away from our own allies," Rob admitted, his frustration with their current predicament surfacing. "Taking the rock was worth the effort, but we've lingered here long enough. We have threats on multiple fronts, and I cannot keep my sights on all of them from here. And I would not risk being stuck here if winter unleashes its fury on us. The question is, what to do about the Iron Islands?" "What would you have done, Your Grace?" Theon questioned, and Rob could practically feel the unease rolling off of his friend. "Tell me, Theon, if you were in my place, what would be your decision?" Theon hesitated a moment, stealing his composure. Such an action could not stand without a strong response. "The Iron Islands remain a threat, and they need to be brought to heel, Your Grace." "Aye, they do," Rob replied. "We have enough to keep our attention without worrying whether the Ironborn are going to raid our shores at inopportune times, or interfere with movement of our forces. It needs to stop, for good. We had a conversation on the way to Casterly Rock. You remember what we spoke of?" "I do. One way or the other, I'm going to see that the threat from Pike is neutralized. If your kin force me to do so, then I will see to it that they meet their drowned god. You are my friend, Theon, and I am not so cruel that I would make you complicit in the fall of your family. If you asked it of me, I would release you from any vow you have given to me as your king, and we would part here today, no ill feelings from me. Obviously, such courtesy would end were you to draw sword against my forces in the future. And if I were not to forsake my vows to you, what would you ask of me?" No Greyjoy will ever rule on Pike again, unless that Greyjoy is you, as a loyal bannerman to the north. I told you that I will need a master of ships, and what better strategic place to house a northern fleet, than at the Iron Islands. You would oversee that endeavor, and your people would be kept employed and flourish so that there would be no need for raiding ever again. It will not be so easy to convince them of this new way of life, Theon sighed. I don't know if they will listen to me. I have been gone a long time. You will not be going alone, Theon, Robb stated. You will take half of Lord Redwyne's fleet, and sail to Pike. I'll leave Patrek Mallister with you to provide support and back up your authority, along with the necessary men to keep order. It will be up to you to make your people see the sense of it. And what will you do? Theon asked. First, I'm going to break through the Golden Tooth and end this fucking stalemate once and for all. Then, I am going to march north to the Twins, while the other half of the Redwyne fleet assails the castle from the sea. What of Casterly Rock? I'm going to leave Garland Tyrell in charge of the castle, with a force big enough to fend off any attempt at a siege. It sounds like you have a plan, Theon nodded. I guess all that's left is my answer. I will be needing it, Robb responded. Theon stood, but as soon as he did so, he kneeled. You are my king, and I will take back my home in your name, your grace. Robb gave a small smile, gesturing for Theon to rise. Enough of that, Lord Greyjoy. There are plans to make. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX how Rob had managed to make himself look presentable, kingly. Small Janumber, Lucas Blackwood, and Gendry were waiting for him outside his chambers, ready to escort him. Given the recent treachery within their own ranks, no one was taking any chances with their king's safety. They left the keep and made their way through Casterly Rock, eventually exiting the castle to a small clearing between the castle and where the majority of Rob's army was camped. The soldiers had formed a circle, crowding around close to 100 chopping blocks that had hastily been erected. Kneeling before each block were the remnants of the free soldiers, and standing beside each of them, a northern soldier with sharpened steel ready to carry out their sentences. As Rob entered the clearing, the chattering of his soldiers quieted, while the desperate pleas for mercy from the condemned became louder. Rob stepped forward, surveying the scene before him. The reality of the situation hit him suddenly. He had killed many men in battle, but was about to extinguish the lives of 100 men with a simple command. But these men had betrayed him, they had betrayed their brothers in arms, killing them with their backs turned in the most cowardly of fashion. He steeled his resolve. There were times when a king had to dispense justice. Though he would like to follow his father's practice of being the man to swing the sword, his wounds and the amount of traitors were forcing him to make an exception this time. I, Rob, of House Stark, King in the North and of the Trident, Lord of Winterfell, find you guilty of treason, and I hereby sentence you to die. Rob stepped back next to his Kingsguard, watching as the executioners placed their charges down into position. It took only a matter of moments before each sword swung true, treasonous free heads littering the ground, blood soaking into the blocks. A deafening silence followed, and Rob stepped forward once more, needing to speak to his men. The Lannisters seek to break us. They fear us, they fear you. You have shown them your mettle on the battlefield time and time again, and these are the sort of schemes they resort to, purchasing the loyalty of fools like the Freys. But they will not break us. Their schemes have failed, as I still stand here before you, blooded, but still your king. Rob stopped to gather himself, looking on as his men watched in rapt attention. I've asked much of you these long months, marched you away from your homes. I've not seen my own home in many months. Well, I say enough. Winter is coming, and it is time that we look to our own. I'd love nothing more than to march to King's Landing and unseat the Lannisters for their crimes, but such is a selfish desire, one that I would not sacrifice even one of your lives for. We will see to our own now, and shore up our kingdom for the future. However, let no man be mistaken. Should our enemies come for us, seek to challenge us, we will meet their force in kind and banish them to the pits of hell. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX Robb had waited only a week before he had ridden east to oversee the siege on the Golden Tooth. His patience had worn thin to nothing, and he was determined to break the defenders in the castle by any means necessary. The sooner this task was done, the sooner he could march north to his family. And when he said march, he meant march, because he was committed to breaking through the tooth and then traveling through the pass up to Riverrun, and eventually, on back to Winterfell. Most of their fleet had departed Lannisport, other than a small contingent that would remain behind for Garland Tyrell's use, and to protect the harbour. Half of Paxter Redwyne's fleet had sailed for the Iron Islands with Theon and Patrek Mallister, while the other half sailed north to Seaguard to assail the Twins and unseat Walder Frey. Robb had not yet decided what to do with the castle, but not having to appeal to that traitorous cunt in the future to secure passage through the Twins would be a welcome boon to all. Robb sat his horse, staring up at the raised position of the tooth. Needing a tactical advantage, Robb had sent a raven to Lord Piper at Pink Maiden and requested that his forces join Robb's own in a non-stop bombardment of the castle. Day and night, the siege engines on both sides of the tooth sent an endless stream of missiles against and over the castle walls, ruthlessly battering it. At night, Robb ordered the rate of fire to increase, as well as sending volleys of flaming arrows over the walls, keeping the defenders awake and attempting to break their resolve. And break their resolve it did. After 5 nights of the devastating offensive, on the 6th morning, white banners appeared waving along the crumbled battlements. Robb had ordered a temporary halt to the attack, watching as the castle gates opened and a trio of riders exited, approaching the northern lines. Robb, along with the Great Jon, Blackfish and a small host of guards, rode out to meet the riders. At the center, Lord Leo Lefford looked as if he had seen much better days. The dourness of the man's expression was undermined by the fact he looked as if he had just rolled down the side of a mountain, his armor dented, face lacerated, and dark shadows beneath his eyes. Lord Lefford Robb greeted the man. Stark the older lord growled, face pinched. "You're speaking to a king," the Great Jon admonished. "Mind your courtesies." Robb placed an arm on his bannerman's arm. "It's fine, Lord Umber. I'll not force a surrendering man to stand on ceremony. I trust that is why you are here, Lord Lefford." "I've come to offer terms," Lefford answered. "If your terms end with you giving up your castle, then I am here to listen," Robb stated. "If not, then I'll be giving my men the order to start their work again. I'll surrender my home, if you guarantee safe passage for all of the castle's inhabitants, including my family. I'd only ask one day to get my affairs in order, but I'll grant you entrance to ease any concerns. I'll grant your family and the rest of your people leave to travel south, unmolested. However, you will stay here, let's just say, as my guest. The rest of your family and men will swear to take no action against my interests. If after a year, they've maintained their oaths, and you've been a proper guest, then we'll revisit the necessity of you remaining here. Those are my terms, take them or leave them." Lefford bristled for a moment. "The terms are accepted. It makes no difference. I have no doubt that Lord Tywine will have me liberated shortly. I keep hearing that, and yet no sign of Lord Tywine. Perhaps your faith is misplaced in a man who defends his incestuous children who murdered their king, rather than his loyal bannerman." "If we're through here," Lord Lefford asked, ignoring Robb. "We are," Robb replied, turning to the Blackfish. "Uncle, take 100 men and follow Lord Lefford back. Secure the castle and make sure that any gold left inside doesn't leave. We wouldn't want Lord Tywine getting his hand on it, would we?" "No, Your Grace," the Blackfish. "We'll give everything a thorough search, rest assured. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX." The next evening, Robb found himself in the Golden Tooth's great hall, listening as his bannerman chattered mindlessly below. He was on his second cup of wine, and could feel himself finally relaxing for the first time in weeks. The exodus from the castle had gone relatively smoothly, and even greater news were the stores of gold that they had discovered in the depths of the castle. The amount of resources that it took to outfit an army was considerable, and Robb found himself fretting daily over how he would make sure that all of his people, not just his soldiers, were able to be fed during the long winter. The gold would certainly help, especially if resources needed to be acquired across the narrow sea. Robb finished up the last lines of his letter to Margaery, letting her know he was on his way to her. He folded the parchment and placed it in his pocket, to deliver to the Maester before he retired for the evening, which he was just about ready to do. However, before he could sneak away, he noticed Gendry seated at the end of a table on his own, nursing a cup. Delaying his plans, Robb stepped down from the Lord's table and took a seat across from his friend, who startled at the king's sudden appearance. "You look as if someone's stolen your favorite hammer," Robb noted, grabbing a pitcher of wine and refilling Gendry's cup. "Apologies, Your Grace," Gendry stuttered, sitting straight. Robb laughed. "Gendry, I like to think I'm not the sort of king who requires his men to smile falsely at all times to feed their pride. I heartily endorse your right to look miserable whenever you like. I was just curious as to why." Gendry shrugged. "No reason, Your Robb. I've never been much for socializing. Not many give notice to an orphan blacksmith's apprentice in Flea Bottom, so it's been good having Theon and Jon around, and yourself, of course. They tend to have more patience with my lack of knowledge about things than others. And now I've sent both your drinking companions away," Robb surmised. "I don't have much room to complain. Could still be in King's Landing waiting for Joffrey to take my head. Anyway, Davos is pleasant enough, and it's been interesting to hear some about my family from him. Soon enough we'll be in Winterfell," Robb stated, raising his cup. "You shouldn't have much to worry about there. My family knows the truth about your father. And you'll have a nice forge to bang about to your heart's content." "I look forward to it," Gendry stated, before a nervous look overtook his face. He leaned in closer to Robb, trying to conceal his words. "I don't mean to sound like I've lost my mind, but I think I'm being stalked." Robb looked at the young man in confusion, but instantly became concerned that it was related to the truth of Gendry's father. "Who do you believe to be stalking you?" Gendry's eyes shifted from side to side, checking to make sure no one was watching, before he slowly lifted his hand and pointed to a spot behind Robb. Robb, mirroring Gendry's attempt at being subtle, turned his head to where Gendry indicated. When the person came into view, Robb's jaw dropped, before he began to laugh heartily. "Gendry," Robb started, turning back to his friend, who looked taken aback at the king's laughter. "That is Daisy Mormont, the daughter of one of my most loyal bannermen. There is no way that she has designs on ending your life. She's been following me everywhere," Gendry whispered. "I swear every time I turn around, there she is. If I'm working in the forge, there she is. If I go off to take a piss, there she is. She's even staring at me again, right now." Robb reached out and patted his friend on the hand. "Gendry, I've known Daisy since I was young. She's a Mormont of Bear Island, where the women are the fiercest in all of Westeros. They have a tendency to take what they want, and if I had my guess, she's sizing you up to warm her bed, not kill you. She wants to fuck. The word is fuck, Gendry." Gendry's eyes were wide, and he didn't look like he was capable of speech at that moment. Robb stood and placed a hand on his shoulder. "If you want my advice, just let her have you. She's a beautiful woman, and she could likely knock you out if she wanted to. Take some joy in life." Before he left, the wine now prominently coursing through him, Robb decided to unnerve Gendry just a little more. "Oh, and I should probably tell you, with the losses to my Kingsguard, I mean to name her to fill one of the vacancies. You two will be working very closely from now on." A satisfied king in the north finally went to send his letter to his wife, grinning the whole way. Chapter 32, Chapter 32. Chapter text. Jon Stark had been riding for over a day when he was finally forced to stop and rest. He had reached the base of the northern mountains, and the terrain and weather had become more treacherous every foot higher that he traveled. The sky was dark, the wind howled and icy snow blew against his face so hard that it felt like pins pricking against his skin. He managed to find a small alcove between several large boulders that provided some protection from the storm. Though it had not been easy, he located enough dry tinder to light a meager fire and warm his limbs. His bed of furs were a modest comfort, but Ghost had curled around him, providing additional warmth. When he woke in the morning, the snow had stopped, but it was still bitterly cold. The ice had caked onto his beard, leaving his jaw stiff. His direwolf companion had also disappeared in the night, searching for his own breakfast. Jon's morning meal consisted of a ration of dried meat and several swallows of water, hardly satisfying, but enough to keep his strength. Soon enough, he was again navigating his horse through the narrow mountain passes. After another half day of riding, he finally crested over a valley between two mountain peaks, his eyes taking in the Bay of Ice far in the distance. Closer, though, he finally saw what he had been looking for. A short ride away was a large village, at the center of which stood a large holdfast, built of a solid combinations of stone and timber. Hanging on the castle's walls were banners bearing 3 wooden buckets on a field of blue. This was the home of the Vels, the largest of the northern mountain clans. The village was active, men and women seeing to their tasks and trades. As John rode into the village, he instantly drew the attention of most. He'd only made it halfway through before several armed men on horse impeded his path. One of the men, bearing a bald head and giant black beard, spoke for them. "What business do you have here, stranger?" John held up his hands, hoping to show he meant no harm. "Greetings. My name is John Stark. I come on behalf of my brother, Robb Stark, King in the North and of the Trident, and Lord of Winterfell. I seek an audience with Lord Val. I am in need of your lord's assistance." The Val man's eyes widened slightly at the introduction before he turned to his companions, a silent conversation seemingly taking place, before the man turned. "The Val is in the castle. We will escort you inside." John followed the riders through the village, and then through the gates of the castle, which were flanked by several modest towers. Once inside the gates, John slid off his mount, allowing a stable boy to take it away to be fed and watered. John took in the various scenes as they walked towards the great hall. Though the clans were a hardened sort, they were also largely civilized. He watched as a blacksmith beat his hammer fiercely against an anvil, shaping metal to his whim, and next to him, several others forming leather into armor. On the other side of the castle, a group of soldiers were sparring viciously. John shifted his attention back to the task at hand, following his guides into the great hall, where a whale of a man sat at a table, nursing a cup of something held in his hand. The man, clearly Lord Hugo Val, turned his attention to the newcomers. "What is this about?" the man asked. John stepped forward, bowing his head in respect. "I apologize for intruding on your privacy, Lord Val. My name is John Stark, and I come to seek your help on behalf of my brother, Robb Stark. I don't mean to offend if I speak of old news, as I am unsure how quickly it travels to you, but our father, Ned Stark, was slain in battle against the Lannisters. Robb has been crowned king in the north." Lord Val stood from the table, shifting his large belly as he did so. He walked to John and placed a mammoth hand on John's shoulder. The news of the Ned's death reached us. We mourned his loss deeply. He was a great man and friend to House Val. House Val pledges its loyalty to the Ned's sons just the same. Your loyalty has never been in doubt, Lord Val. Which is why I have come to you now. How can House Val be of service to House Stark? The king has sent me north with a force of 3,000 to reinforce the wall. However, on the way, we encountered devastation wrought by Lord Bolton's bastard on a village on Long Lake. I fear the Boltons have ambitions that would see them rise up against my family. And you seek my fighting men? Lord Val questioned. My lord. I mean to confront the Boltons over Ramsay's crimes, but I fear my concerns over their treachery to be true. They can muster more men than I have brought north with me, John stated. If it is men you seek, then it is men you will have, John Stark. We will bleed the Boltons dry for even thinking to betray the sons of the Ned. How many men can you spare? I'll need to leave some to protect against those fucking Ironborn raiders, but I can give you 600 men. Give me another day, and I can guarantee you at least another 600 from the Flint and the Nuri. Those two won't turn down the chance to fight for the Ned's sons." John was more than pleased. 1,200 men was more than he could have expected, and the clansmen were fierce fighters. As far as he was concerned, one northern clansman was as good as 2 Bolton men. "Thank you, Lord Val. You have the gratitude of House Stark, and the promise that we will always come to your aid, should the need arise." "Of that I do not doubt," Lord Val grinned. "It is not often that we get to host a Stark, so tonight we shall feast to the Ned's memory, and drink to the king in the north." Lord Val placed his arm around John's shoulder. "Now come, we will find you a soft bed to rest from your journey." XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX. Robb Stark would not suffer traitors. Especially ones who plotted attempts on his life. Robb was intent on teaching the phrase that lesson. With the Westerlands tamed, and Casterly Rock secured, Robb had finally marched back east into the Riverlands and to Riverrun. Upon his arrival, he had learned that Theon had made good on his promise, and secured the Iron Islands for the north. The Ironborn had unsurprisingly put up a spirited fight, but the breadth of the Redwyne fleet and the number superiority had been too much for the defenders to stave off. Balon Greyjoy was dead, killed when his escaping ship was sunk. Theon's sister was a captive, but Balon Greyjoy's brothers had managed to flee, their whereabouts unknown. Half of the Redwyne fleet was now anchored around the Iron Islands, while the other half was anchored around Seaguard, waiting for his word to move against the twins. The twins. They were the source of his current aching head. If it were just a matter of their numbers versus his, the engagement would be over in a blink. However, the twins presented unique challenges, namely having to besiege two castles on different sides of the Green Fork which were connected by a large span of bridge. He'd been ruminating over plans for over a week with his lords, but every option seemed to end with him sending thousands of men to their inevitable deaths. That was something he could not do, no matter how much he wanted to be in Winterfell with his wife. Robb stood from his desk, pouring himself another cup of wine to dull his frustrations. His wounds from the assassination attempt had finally healed completely, and he was in the mood for a fight. Looking out the window, he could still see that night had not yet completely washed over the sky. Figuring that Gendry would still be awake, he left his solar intent on sparring with his friend. Traversing the halls of Riverrun, his guard for the evening, Lucas Blackwood at his back, Robb made his way to Gendry's quarters. The door was shut, but Robb, his impatience getting the best of him, neglected to think about knocking and announcing his presence. Pushing the door open, he was confronted with a modest room, and the sounds of laboured grunts and panting. Robb's advance inside stopped when he saw a bare female backside rising and falling frantically atop another, equally naked, form. Caught by surprise, Robb could only stare as the woman arched up, head falling backwards, exposing bared breasts. As the woman leaned back, her eyes caught the king in the north standing in the doorway. Daisy Mormont stopped the pounding of her hips, eyes wide. Almost immediately, she leapt up from her bed partner, who unsurprisingly turned out to be Gendry. The former blacksmith stared with wide eyes, before his hands reached down to cover his cock, which had been left exposed. Daisy meanwhile, still completely nude, had dropped to a knee in front of him, head bowed. "Apologies, Your Grace," she stated. "No, the apologies are mine," Robb coughed, trying to keep his eyes away from the woman's strong features. He had been too long without the touch of his queen. Looking back up, he saw a disheveled Gendry had managed to roll himself into a sheet, arms and all. Robb had to hold back a laugh. "Was there something you needed, Your Grace?" Gendry questioned, still slightly frantic. "Nothing, that cannot wait," Robb answered, already walking backwards to the door. While he had restrained his own laughter, he could hear Lucas Blackwood snickering unreservedly outside. "Feel free to resume your previous activities. Don't break him, Daisy. I need him in fighting shape." "Of course, Your Grace," Daisy responded, mirth now in her voice as well. "I'll leave him in one piece." Shaking his head, Robb closed the door behind him. Lucas had only just managed to compose himself. "What do you say, Blackwood? Up for a fight?" "My first choice seems to be otherwise engaged. I have to say, I did warn the poor boy. I may not be able to get the sight out of my head, but I'll do my best to offer a challenge, Your Grace." Lucas grinned. Robb was about to respond, but the sound of hurried steps heading their way stopped him. He reached for the hilt of his sword, Lucas doing the same as he stood in front of his king. However, their stances eased when they saw Edmure Tully running towards them. "What is it, uncle?" Robb inquired as the man stopped in front of him. Breathing heavily, Edmure gathered himself. "Our guards intercepted a rider from the north. She says she needs to speak with the king." "She," Robb frowned. "Who is it?" "Roslyn Free, Robb. One of Walder Free's daughters." "Where is she now?" "I did not want to attract attention to her arrival, so she's currently in some empty servants' quarters, under guard." "Well, best go figure out why the girl would willingly walk into the hands of her family's enemies." Robb followed Edmure through the castle, down to a quiet corridor by the kitchens. Two Tully men stood sentry outside a door. Edmure swept past them, opening the door for Rob. Rob was unsure what to expect when he walked in, but it was not the slight woman who sat at a table, picking at some bread that had been provided to her. His anger at the phrase may have negatively colored his expectations of what the girl would be, but she was no horned monster, just a young, innocent-looking thing, with soft features. Her brown eyes met Rob's as he stepped inside, and he thought he could see something akin to shame there, for what reason he was not sure. Rob pulled up a stool and sat before her. "You are Rosalind Free." "I am, Your Grace," the girl almost whispered. "I'm sure you can understand my confusion as to why the daughter of the man who betrayed me and tried to have me killed would choose to walk herself into my custody." Rosalind nodded. "I do, Your Grace. When news reached the twins that you had returned east, I knew that I had to take this chance. My father is not a good man. He would offer each of us up for slaughter if he thought he stood to gain from it. And he has, Your Grace. My poor brother was slain by his own family for my father's greed." "Your brother?" Rob questioned. "Oliver, Your Grace. He was murdered at Casterly Rock." Rob nodded, remembering Oliver speaking of a sister. "Your brother served me bravely, Lady Roslin. He stood against his kin to uphold his vows and his honor. However, I'm still not sure what it is that has compelled you to be here tonight." "In truth, Your Grace, I come here at the behest of my eldest brother, Pawin. We understand that what our father has done is unforgivable, and that there will be harsh consequences for it, even the destruction of our house. We would like to offer our assistance, to possibly forestall some of the bloodshed, with certain conditions. I'll say it is rather bold to sit before a king and seek conditions beyond that of your guaranteed safety, but I will admit that I am curious. My brother is a good man, but he is not above his own ambitions, Your Grace. That being said, he is willing to help you gain entry to the castle, in exchange for being named the new Lord of the Twins. He would swear his fealty to you, Your Grace. And what guarantee do I have that once your brother is installed as Lord, he would not pull the same treacherous games as your father?" At the question, Rosalind breathed deeply, clearly flushed. "As a show of good faith, and to secure the lasting ties of our families, Lord Edmure and I would be married. Pawin's firstborn son would also be sent to be fostered at Winterfell." Rob heard a loud throat clearing from Edmure behind him, but ignored his uncle's reaction for the moment. Edmure would do what his king ordered, not that being married to Rosalind would be a chore. "Say that I may be entertaining this proposal, how exactly would your brother get us into the Twins?" "On some days, my brother is in charge of the castle defenses, including the gates. He would sabotage the gate to allow your men passage inside. And how could we trust that there would not be an ambush waiting for us on the other side? I shall remain here as your hostage, Your Grace. If you are in agreement with our terms, my brother shall be on watch duty in 2 days' time. Send a man to light 2 torches along the bank of the Green Fork. My brother will be on the lookout for it." "Then what?" "The following day, provisions are scheduled to be brought in from the nearby villages. The gates will be open for a time. That is when my brother will sabotage the gate, so that it cannot be closed, nor the drawbridge raised. Your men will be able to enter the castle freely." Rob stood and paced the room, digesting this plan. It was bold, but it was also the best option that had presented itself. It would not secure both castles, but it was possible that taking one would destroy the Frey's resolve. The timeline was tight, so a decision needed to be made. Rob decided it was time to be bold. "Uncle, send a raven to Seaguard. Tell them the fleet is to sail into the Cape of Eagles, and deploy our men on the coast, keeping cover behind the forests west of the Twins. In 3 days' time, they shall march on the Twins. I will lead our forces north from Riverrun, and we shall converge on the castle gates." "Does this mean I am to be married?" Edmure asked, glancing at the free girl. "If Lady Roslin and Lord Pawin are true to their word, then we shall have peace on their terms. So yes, uncle. You are to be married. However, now is not the time to worry on such matters. We'll need to ready the men. If we're to make it to the Twins in time, then we march tonight." Edmure spared a glance at his future bride before leaving to do his king's bidding. Rob remained, looking down at the free girl. "I'm about to send thousands of my men into danger on your word. If this is a trick and more deceit from your family, then yours shall be the first head that I take, my lady. If you wish to take back your words, now is your last chance. Rosalind shook her head, eyes determined. I swear to the gods that my words are only the truth, your grace. We shall see, my lady. We shall see. Chapter 33, Chapter 33. Chapter text. 3 days had passed, and Rob found himself standing on the banks of the Green Fork, just a mile away from the twins. The day to execute their plan had come, however, along with it had come some of the densest fog he had ever seen. The weather was growing more and more unpredictable by the day, constant signs that winter was truly coming for Westeros. The more immediate problem was that he could barely see several paces in front of him, let alone the gates of the twins. We should wait this out, your grace, the Blackfish advised. We're already taking a damn risk believing the words of a bloody free woman. Add going in blind and it's the makings of a massacre. No question it's not ideal, Rob admitted. Though, if we can't see them, they can't see us either. But if we get stuck outside the gates, we won't be hard to miss with a flurry of arrows raining down on us. Men panic, and it will be chaos. Rob rubbed a hand down his beard, contemplating his next move. He knew his uncle's concerns were well-founded, and a cautious approach was wise in the situation. However, his desire to get north and return home to Winterfell had made him restless, and likely a touch reckless. The reckless side was winning the battle of wills in his thoughts. You're right. We can't risk getting the men stuck in a logjam outside the gates. They'll move too slow if things turn sour and the castle is sealed. The Blackfish sighed. I'm sensing a however coming. Rob looked at his uncle's grim face and couldn't help but grin. However, that means we should go in fast, and get out fast, if the circumstances call for it. Horseback, the Blackfish guessed. Horseback, Rob agreed. No infantry. 200, May 3. We'd be a much smaller number, but we could come up with greater surprise on the gates. Riders in the rear would signal our men to the west and to the south, once we're sure the gate is secure. If the skies were clear, I'd call it foolish, but the fog is just as much to our advantage as theirs, maybe more so. What will be especially foolish is when you next tell me you intend to lead the charge at the gates, your grace. I'll ease your worry, somewhat, Uncle Rob stated. While I'll be riding with the men, I want some of our best archers riding at the front. As soon as we reach the gates, a volley of arrows through the doors should give us some breathing room to get inside the gates and form up some defensive lines inside the gatehouse while we wait for our reinforcements. The larger issue is that, unless the gods are truly blessing us, Walder's likely to be in the other castle. It's where his seat is, and that ancient cunt isn't traipsing around between castles anymore, the Blackfish noted. One step at a time, then Rob responded. We take the western castle, then we secure the bridge and the water tower. If we cannot infiltrate the eastern castle, then at the worst we'll have Old Walder trapped. I'm sure between Greywater Watch, Old Castle and White Harbor, they could muster enough men to blockade the other entrance, nothing in or out. Walder's got enough mouths to feed just within his own family, they'd surely burn through their rations in no time. The Blackfish patted Rob on the shoulder. I have to commend you, nephew. You've got the mind of a seasoned commander. Your youthful exuberance, on the other hand, is going to bite you in the bollocks one day. Not today, uncle. Not today. Rob placed an arm around his uncle's shoulders. Come, let's see to the preparations. XXXXXXXXX. Rob adjusted his breastplate, checking the fastenings one last time before he mounted his horse. He swung the beast around to face the rest of his men, around 300 riders in total. His Kingsguard surrounded him, ready to protect their king's back as he rode into danger once again. Grey Wind paced back and forth beside him, ready to be unleashed to his natural talents. He drew his sword, holding it high above his head. The men quieted, leaving only the sound of 300 horses moving about. I've asked much of you all over these many months. And every time I have asked, you've proven your quality beyond my greatest expectations. It is my greatest honor to ride and fight beside you. Now, we have one more fight in front of us. One more fight that afterwards will see us back to our homes and our families, to prepare for the coming winter. Rob turned his horse, pointing his sword toward the twins. Walder Free has spent a lifetime hiding in the shadows, seeking his ambitions on the backs of better men. He has skirted his oaths and he has plotted against us, and he has spilled the blood of our brothers in arms, including my own. Today, justice comes for Walder Free. The North remembers. A chorus of echoing cries followed the king's words. Robb spotted the Blackfish mounted a short distance away. "Form up your men, uncle. We'll fall in behind." "Yes, your grace." "Archers, with me." 50 Riverrun riders, all with bows over their backs, rode forward, forming up behind the Blackfish, who was leading the charge to the gates. "Ride hard, men. Let's take that fucking castle." The Blackfish set off with his men, and Robb moved to his own. He would be leading the second wave, while the Great Yon led the third. Robb encouraged his mount forward, and the rest of his men followed, Lucas Blackwood and Dacy Mormont on his left and right. Grey Wind glided out in front of them all. While they rode at a good pace, it was not overly blistering, as the fog still hindered their sight lines. They kept close to the river bank to guide their direction. In what felt like mere minutes, Robb could see the blurry outline of the twins, which was shortly followed by shouting in front of him. Then there were suddenly people scurrying and running for their lives around them, some of them desperately pulling carts or livestock with them. He breathed a sigh of relief, when he realized they were not his men, but villagers who had been either en route or leaving the castle. It was apparent that at least that part of Rosalind Frey's statements had been correct, as they were supplying the castle. Finally, the fog broke and the castle entrance was clearly before him. The Blackfish and his archers had already dismounted just before the drawbridge. Their bows were drawn, and they were loosing arrows through the thankfully open gates. Robb watched as Free guards scrambled frantically to try and close but one by one they were felled by Tully arrows. The archers had formed on either side of the drawbridge, leaving it open for Robb and his men. Sword drawn, Robb charged hard at the bridge, passing over it unimpeded, and only slightly avoiding an arrow coming down from overhead. A second wave of free men were attempting to form up a defense inside the gatehouse, but Grey Wind leapt above their shields, biting into one guard's shocked face. The sheer scene of seeing a man's face ripped off spooked the other defenders, setting them on their back foot. Robb took advantage of their distraction and crashed his horse through, bringing down his sword in bruising strikes, slicing into his foes. The horses quickly became cumbersome to maneuver in close quarters, so Robb dismounted, pulling his shield from where it had been attached to the saddle. "To me! To me!" Robb called. His guard was beside him in an instant, a block of shields and swords pushing the disoriented Freys backwards. Robb shoved his sword through one man's neck, while Lucas Blackwood opened the belly of another, spilling slippery guts onto the stone floor. Robb staggered back a step as a crossbow bolt split the top of his shield, splinters flying. The first bolt was followed by another, and Robb looked upwards to see lines of archers beginning to rain down their missiles on them from the castle upper levels. There was a large entrance hall just in front of them, but they would be easy targets in the open if they moved further inside. Robb turned and saw Gendry smashing his hammer through man's eye. He grabbed the young man, pulling him close so that he could hear his words. "I'm going to lead the men up to clear the walls and the outer defenses so that we can flank them, but we'll need cover. Go back and tell the Blackfish to move his archers inside the gatehouse and to fire towards the men up top." Gendry nodded, already backstepping. "Right away, your grace." Robb turned his attention back to the fight, clashing swords. Spotting stairs in the gatehouse, he shifted, calling out, "To the walls! Up the stairs!" Robb reached the steps first and began climbing. He cut down two guards trying to make their way to the gate, pushing them to the side. Robb looked back and saw the small Janumber and Lucas Blackwood leading a group of a dozen men behind him. He fell back and locked shields as they methodically made their way up the tower. They met limited resistance before finally reaching the battlements. The archers and crossbowmen defending the castle's front wall were distracted at the incoming invasion below, so they cried out in terror as Robb and his men immediately set upon them, hacking off limbs and throwing the bodies down into the courtyard below. The quality of the Freys' defense was dismal. Robb could not help but think that if they had actually showed up for battles over the years, they may have been better fighters. The front walls were cleared almost completely within a matter of minutes, with some of the defenders simply abandoning their posts and disappearing into the depths of the castle. Looking down, Rob saw that the Tully archers had made it inside the gatehouse and were unleashing their arrows up towards the castle's defenders. This cleared the way for their third wave of men led by the Great Jon to storm the inner chambers of the castle. Rob and his guard methodically moved through towers and rooms, dispatching the remaining defenders with little incident. They circled the walls until they converged on the keep, where a number of men had already surrendered to the Great Jon and the Blackfish. The castle secured, Rob sheathed his sword and approached his uncle. "Losses?" Rob asked. "Minimal," the Blackfish answered. 20 at the most, plus a few more with bolt holes in them. No sign of Walder, though no surprise. "Secure the prisoners, but then I want to move on the bridge," Rob instructed. "Should we wait for our reinforcements?" the Great Jon questioned. "No. We've caught them by surprise. Let's secure the water tower before they have a chance to properly man it." "We'll get it done," the Great Jon stated, before turning to the men who were milling around. "Formations. We're moving on the bridge." The bridge was large enough to fit lines 6 men wide. Shields locked, Rob's forces moved out into the open air. The water tower stood high at the center of the bridge, and Rob could see men up top with bows. There were also numerous arrow slits in the tower walls, and after his men had made it halfway to the tower, missiles began to crash down on them once more. Several of his men fell to arrow wounds, but their lines pushed on. The doors at the base of the tower were a thick combination of wood and steel, which were unfortunately sealed shut, barred from the inside. "Form up on the door," Rob roared, as the men crowded against the reinforced tower door. "As one. On my count. 1, 2, 3, push." The crush of Rob's soldiers heaved against the door, barely causing it to shake. 5 more tries, and no further progress was made. Rob screamed in frustration as another arrow took a man to his left, the lifeless body falling against him. "Fuck," he cursed, looking left and right as if a solution would suddenly be found. "Maybe we should pull back to the castle," Your Grace, Lucas Blackwood proposed. "We need a fucking ram. The door is too thick. The longer we wait, the more they bolster their defense." Rob lamented any such delay. "Pardon, Your Grace," Gendry interrupted from behind him. "There was a thick wood beam inside the castle. It looks like it was used to secure the inner door against an incursion from the bridge. If I can scrounge some spare steel from the castle, I could hammer in some handholds for a ram." "How quickly can you do it?" Rob asked. "Give me 10 minutes and 10 men, Your Grace. I'll get it done." Gendry was already spinning his hammer in his hand, as if planning its coming strikes. Rob nodded. "Go. Be quick about it. If this works, I'll give you a castle when this is over." Gendry's eyes widened, but he immediately turned and squeezed his way to the rear of the lines. Rob turned his attention back to the door, making sure his shield was still covering everything important. After a series of long minutes, there was a commotion behind him. Looking back, the center of their force parted, revealing 10 of his men carrying the giant beam, Gendry trailing behind them. There were random nails and steel rods sticking out from the sides, which Gendry had apparently managed to repurpose from other uses in the castle. "Let them through," Rob ordered, standing aside himself so that the men were right at the door. "Break the fucker down. Cover them." Rob raised his shield higher, personally giving cover to one of the men holding the ram. The men took a coordinated step back, then smashed the ram against crevice between the double doors. Whereas the doors had barely moved earlier, this time they groaned, metal hinges bending, wood splitting. There were concerned shouts within the tower, and justifiably so, because on the second swing of the ram, there was an even louder crack, the doors now bending inwards. "One more time, boys," Rob encouraged. "Prepare to charge the doors." The ram holders took an extra step back this time, then rushed the door again. On impact, the doors completely surrendered, collapsing inwards as the supports broke. As soon as the doors cleared, arrows flew from inside, felling several of the men still staggering with the momentum of the ram. Rob pushed past them, running forwards and sticking his sword through one of the bowmen. His men followed, slaughtering every enemy in sight. "Clear the tower," Rob ordered, as his men began climbing upwards. Rob pushed through and saw that the doors to the other side of the tower were wide open, a few of the defenders running back across the bridge towards the eastern castle. Some of the men behind him had realized that their king had drifted alone outside, forming up around him again. Rob took a few more steps out onto the bridge, watching the castle. For some reason, it seemed to be eerily quiet now. No free force was on its way to impede them. All of a sudden, the castle doors opened, and a lone rider trotted out onto the bridge. The rider raised a white banner in the sky, waving it frantically. "Well, look at that," the Blackfish muttered. "I always knew they were fucking cowards, but I expected at least a few days of delay before they bent over." "Put our archers up top for cover," Rob called out behind him, before turning to his uncle. "I'll believe it when I see it." Rob moved forward slowly with his guard until he was standing halfway across the bridge. The free rider slowly met them until they were only a few paces apart. "Speak your terms," Rob prompted. "We wish no more hostility, Your Grace," the man started. "We shall stand down, if you promise to spare the lives of those remaining in the castle." "Walder Free is simply going to surrender?" Rob questioned. "Pardon, Your Grace, but Lord Walder no longer commands the castle," the rider answered. "Who commands the castle?" "Sir Pawin, Your Grace. He has taken command of the castle and the guard, myself included." "And where is Lord Walder now?" Rob inquired. "Dead, Your Grace." "How did he die?" "An unfortunate accident. It seems he slipped and fell on several knives, Your Grace." Rob sighed internally. He had so looked forward to taking the old traitor's head, but somehow he had little surprise of the fact that his own kin had done the deed first. "Terms are accepted. Open the castle doors. Have the rest of your guard abandon their posts, lay down their arms and march onto the bridge so they can be secured and accounted for by my men. No harm will come to anyone else, if my instructions are followed. Any treachery, and I'll hang every last man by the neck off of this bridge. You will be the first. Am I understood?" "Understood, Your Grace." "Very clearly. Good. Put any remaining of Walder's kin in the Great Hall. I'll meet Sir Pawin there once the castle is secured and we'll settle our debts for today." "At once, Your Grace." Rob watched the rider trot off again towards the castle. "What a fucking day," Rob muttered. "I hope you don't mean to leave all the Freys here to their own devices," the Blackfish stated. "Leaving one of them as Lord of the Crossing is one thing, but leave a bunch of those sniveling rats here and they will plan and scheme unrestrained." "We'll leave a strong garrison at the castle for an indefinite time," Rob responded. "Seeing as the Tullys are their liege lords, I'll leave it to you, uncle, to determine what happens with the rest of them." "Can I send them all to the bloody wall?" Best not. They'd just as likely figure a way to knock the thing down, and then we'd all be fucked." "I won't do that to Lord Commander Mormont." "You'll figure something appropriate out." Rob turned to head back through the tower. "Where are you going?" the Blackfish asked. "I think everything's well in hand here. Get word to the rest of our forces the day is won and they can stand down. I'm going to go find a raven. I need to tell my queen I'm finally coming home." Chapter 34, Chapter 34. Chapter text. Jon rode at the front of their group, Lord Val next to him. They had left a day later than expected, but with the added benefit of a few hundred extra men bolstering their strength. Their numbers were closer now to 1,500 men, and quite a few fearsome mountain women. The trip through the Wolfswood was quick, despite the poor weather conditions. The mountain clans were hardened to these conditions, moving through them with little bother or complaint. As they reached Long Lake, Jon could see the smoke from numerous fires where his men had set up a makeshift camp. Jon ordered several of his men to get the new additions settled into the camp, while Jon and Lord Val made their way to the command tent, where his two fellow commanders were secluded. Helman Tallheart and Robin Flint sat on tree stumps that had been repurposed into chairs, a fire crackling between them. "Welcome back," Lord Flint greeted. "I trust your journey was successful." "Very," Jon responded, taking a knee beside the fire to warm his hands. "Lord Val has added another 1,500 to our number." "That's good because we're very well like to need them," Lord Flint stated, his face grim. "Has something happened?" "Our archers intercepted a raven from the Dread Fort." "Your intuition about the situation was spot on. Roose Bolton has sold himself to the Lannisters, in exchange for power in the north." Jon simmered inside at the confirmation of the betrayal. Do we know of their plans? It seems they mean to attempt to weaken the resolve of King Rob's army by taking the castles of his lords, then holding their families as prisoners. Helman answered. They mean to march on the Umbers first, then move to the other nearby castles, Carhold and Hornwood. If Roose takes control of Last Hearth and Carhold, he'll effectively control half of the northern territories, with the exception of White Harbour. Flint added. The Lannisters, or even Baelish in the Vale, could land thousands of soldiers on our shores unimpeded. Not to mention the more immediate threat to Winterfell, with the king still in the south. Has there been any movement from the Bolton forces yet? Jon asked. Not yet, though our scouts report it to be clearly evident they are preparing for a march. Tallheart noted. The other castles won't be able to withstand a siege by the Boltons for long, Jon stated. Too many of the men are south with Robb. The Boltons will only become harder to beat back if they secure more castles to defend. Do we know the whereabouts of Ramsay? Still at the Dread Fort according to our latest report, Helman responded. Shall we march on the castle? Lord Flint asked. Our numbers may be closer to even now, but I don't know that we'd survive an attempted siege of the castle. We're not outfitted for it. No, you're right, Jon responded. We'd be decimated in a straight attack on the castle. But what if we turn the tables? How so? Helman questioned. We ride hard and march fast to Last Hearth and surprise the Boltons with a rigorous defense of the castle. They are expecting the Umber defenses to be made up of household guards and old men, not 1,000 men on the walls, ready to repel their attack. It's good ground to mount a defense. Lord Val made his presence known. The castle sits high in the hills. We should leave half the men inside to defend the walls, while the other half lay in waiting behind the castle to mount a surprise charge. My men would be up to the task. We will skewer the Boltons on our spears. The plan is sound, Jon agreed. We'll need to move quickly to make sure we are prepared before the Boltons arrive. Lord Flint, ride with an advance party to Last Hearth to warn them what's coming. The Great Jon and Small Jon are both with Robb, so it's likely that the Great Jon's uncles are managing the castle. Take control of the rookery, Robin. No ravens and no riders are to leave the castle, by my order. Be delicate about it. Moors and Hother Umber are difficult, and will be quick to take offense, but I won't risk word carrying of our arrival. We'll secure the castle, Lord Flint assured, rising from his seat. If you should be looking for your 2 wilderling friends, they are shackled in a tent next to us. That woman put a dagger through one of the men's cock when he made an attempt to lay with her. Thought it was best for everyone to keep them segregated. Jon shook his head in frustration as he watched the man leave. Gathering himself, he turned back to the other 2 men. Let's get the camp packed. We need to travel fast, so keep baggage to a minimum, weapons and provisions only. We can send riders back later for anything essential. The 2 men left, leaving Jon alone. He rested for only a moment, listening to the sudden bustle of activity outside as the men began to organize. Eventually, he made his way to where the 2 wildlings were secured. As he entered the tent, their eyes found his, surprised at his sudden presence. We are leaving. We're traveling north to Last Hearth. To continue on to the wall? Tormund asked. Not yet, unfortunately. The Boltons have betrayed my family and are marching on our bannermen. We are going to mount a defense of Last Hearth to stop the Boltons from taking it. You're wasting time, Stark, Tormund scoffed. You should be looking to the north, not squabbling with other kneelers. Those kneelers would not have given you a second thought before removing your head from your body, Jon countered. Any hope your people have is gone if Roose Bolton takes control of the north. Your words about White Walkers and Night Kings would be nothing but wind to his ears, and he'd see the bodies of your kin flayed bare and mounted to spikes. If you want to survive, then Roose Bolton must fall. So this is no fucking squabble, Tormund Giantsbane. The red-bearded wildling simply grunted, sufficiently muzzled for the moment. Taking advantage of the silence, Jon moved forward and cut the bindings on their wrists. As he stepped back from Ygritte, he looked at her intently. Please don't stab any more of my men. No promises. They touch my ass, I take their balls. Jon just sighed, his head beginning to ache. Fair enough. He sheathed his knife and made to exit the tent, but was stopped by the wildling woman. Can you beat the Boltons? John, not completely sure why he was wasting time on questions, answered, "Our numbers are similar, though some of our strength is made up of mountain clansmen. We're not likely outfitted as heavily as the Boltons, but our plan is to make them attack us from a position of strength. Then you could use 2 more fighters," Ygritte stated. She looked over at Tormund briefly, but the Wilderling man simply grunted with indifference. "Arm us and we'll help you kill the Kneelers. I'm good with a bow, better than most of your soldiers, I'd bet." "You want me to give you both weapons?" Jon questioned. "You've already emasculated one of my men, how am I to trust you would not plot your escape and kill us when our backs were turned?" "You just said it yourself, Stark. Our fates depend on the Boltons dying. Might as well see the job done right." "I cannot believe I'm saying this, but I'll think on it," Jon sighed. "Come, we need to move. See if you can make yourselves useful with the preparations." They'd broken camp remarkably quickly, and were fortunate enough to make it to Last Hearth just as the last of the daylight faded away to the darkness. Jon rode out front, Ghost beside him. His initial thought was that Lord Val was correct in his assessment. The castle was perfectly situated to mount a defense. The only potential point of weakness would be an attack from behind, but such an attack would require climbing miles of jagged, rocky hills, which was anything but logistically practical. The walls of the castle were already well manned, and Jon expected that Roblin Flint had done enough to encourage the Umbers. As he passed through the gates, a small contingent was waiting for him. The eccentric brothers, Mors and Hodder Umber, stood in front of the pack. Other than their long white beards, they were completely opposites in appearance. Mors was a typical Northman, built large and powerful, even in his advanced age. His appearance was made all the more striking by the fact that he was missing an eye, the whole covered by a white eye patch. Hodder, on the other hand, looked every bit his age, gaunt to the point of looking sickly. Jon dismounted and approached the 2 men, each of whom dropped to a knee in front of him. "Welcome to Last Hearth, my Prince," Mors Umbers greeted him. "Please rise," Jon requested, still uncomfortable with the reminders of his new royal status. "Events are in motion, and there is no time to stand on ceremony." Both of the Umber brothers rose up. "Lord Flint has told us that those Bolton cunts mean to come and take our home. I'll be damned if I let a single Bolton step foot in this castle, unless it is so I can remove his head and mount it on the walls." "We don't mean to let that happen," Jon promised. "For now, we still have the element of surprise, and we can use it to our advantage to lure them in. How many defenders do you have left?" "We can muster at least 300, Hodder answered this time. "Some of them are boys, but they've had bows in their hands since they took their first steps. We'll put them to use, even if it is to just give the Boltons a false impression of our strength," Jon stated. "I don't mean to take advantage of your hospitality, but we'll need to fit as many men within your walls as we can. It is imperative that the Boltons not know we are here. Lord Val will take his men into the hills to scout the best path to mount an attack on the Bolton attackers." "It will be tight, but we'll make it work," Mors answered. "I'll fit 20 men in my own bed if I must." "Your commitment is to be lauded, my lord," Jon grinned. Mors approached and placed a meaty hand on Jon's shoulder. "Come now, we'll see you well fed. And while we feast, you can tell me of my nephew's exploits down south with King Robb." After a long evening of being interrogated by the Umbers, Jon stumbled into the room that he had been provided. He had declined the offer of better quarters, instead taking a small guest room that was sparsely furnished, though he sighed with relief when he saw that he had been left a basin of warm water. Jon nearly tore the clothing from his body until his torso was left bare, leaning over and splashing the water over his face and into his hair. The stress of the past day slowly left his shoulders as he scrubbed himself free of the accumulated dirt and grime. It wasn't a bath, but it would do for the time being. Clad in only his breeches, he sat on the small bed, thinking of the letter that he would draft to Sir Roderick on the morrow to put him on notice to secure Winterfell's defences should things go poorly. He thought briefly of writing to Robb, but in truth he knew not where his brother was, and it would not do to have news of strife in the north getting out to fuel Lannister propaganda. Unable to contain a yawn, he fell back into the bedding. He stared at the ceiling, feeling consciousness slowly leaving him, until a knock at his door brought him back. Concerned that the Boltons had already made the march north, he shot up, practically leaping to the door. However, when he pulled it open, The sight that met him momentarily had him at a loss. "You're a bit skinny for a prince," Ygritte smirked, admiring his chest. Jon, still momentarily stunned, shook himself from his stupor. "What are you doing here? How did you get in here? Wasn't much of a challenge. You best find some guards, could have gutted you in your sleep if I wanted. Why didn't you? Killing a northern prince wouldn't make many sympathetic to our cause. Whether you do or don't, I don't know that many will be sympathetic to your cause," Jon admitted, retreating back to sit on his bed. "You're willing to listen. Can't ask for much more than that," Ygritte responded, all too casually closing the door, leaving them alone together. "I'm still not sure I understand what you are doing here at this moment," Jon stated, his cautious mind calculating how long it would take him to get to his sword, if necessary. While it didn't look like Ygritte was armed, there was no telling what she had hidden in her furs. A traitorous part of Jon's mind thought that he might like to see everything she had hidden under her furs. "You really know nothing, Jon Stark." Before Jon even had a moment to comprehend, Ygritte had removed her furs, and was slowly pulling her borrowed tunic over her head. Inch after inch of pale skin was slowly revealed, until Jon was staring intently at a modest set of breasts. Her top now removed, Ygritte smirked at Jon's amazement, but continued on and slowly kicked off her boots. Without a second thought, she lowered her breeches, exposing her thin, but muscled thighs. Jon's eyes immediately drifted to the patch of thick red hair between her legs. He had to consciously remind himself to breathe as Ygritte almost stalked towards him, as if he were her prey. Her hands rested on his shoulders, then crawled up his neck, into his hair. With a gentle tug, he was suddenly staring into mischievous eyes. "North of the wall, we take the things that we want," she drawled out. "It just so happens right now I want a prince." All of a sudden her hand left his hair and found its way to the hardened length between his thighs, wrapping around it tightly. "It feels like the prince wants a wildling woman." Every thought in Jon's head was telling him that this was an awful idea, that nothing good would come of it. However, the rest of his body was intoxicated by the redhead, and he let himself be pushed backward on the bed. Ygritte crawled onto his thighs, her hands tugging down his own breeches, and his cock jumped free. Things were moving fast, and Jon had to stop himself from crying out when Ygritte seated herself in his lap, his cock suddenly surrounded by indescribable warmth and pleasure he had never experienced. Jon was almost content to allow the wildling to have her way with him, feeling her move herself up and down. However, he looked into her eyes and saw a sense of smugness there that grated slightly at this pride. Gathering his strength, he gripped her hips and flipped them over. The look of smugness was gone as Jon leaned down, softly biting a breast as he thrust into Ygritte. The wildling grunted in what Jon hoped was pleasure, but he was so lost in his own that he could not tell. He lasted only several more minutes before his entire body jolted as he spilled inside her fluttering heat. Overcome by the moment, he fell forward and crushed his lips to Ygritte's. They attacked each other until both were breathless, and Jon felt his softened member slip from her. He fell to his side, breathing hard as he stared at her. Ygritte looked back, the smugness having returned. "Does this mean you'll let me fight the Boltons?" Jon stared back at her blankly. "Did you lay with me so I would give you a bow?" Ygritte rolled over so she was laid on top of him again. "I figured it would be an added benefit." "Benefit of what?" Ygritte leaned down and carefully bit his bottom lip. "You're mine now, Jon Stark. And I'm your woman." The firestorm of bad things that were likely to come from this played through his mind, but as Jon's hands slowly descended down Ygritte's naked back and lower, he told those thoughts to fuck off elsewhere. Chapter 35, Chapter 35. Chapter text. In the end, Ygritte had gotten her bow. She had also occupied Jon's bed each evening for the 3 nights they had spent at Last Hearth. Every bit of common sense told him that it was a horrible idea, but there was something about the wildling that was addictive. She was no great beauty, and by no means a proper lady befitting a prince, but he was sure that was what he liked about her. He had spent his life never seeking to offend or place a toe out of line, and she was wild and uninhibited, his complete opposite. A wry thought crossed his mind that he and his natural father both had a proclivity for women from the far north who they had no business pursuing. Jon walked alone along the walls of the castle, once again needlessly checking their preparations, just for want of something else to occupy his mind other than his fiery-haired wilding. He had done so each evening. The daylight was beginning to wane, and he was prepared to hunker down again for the night, but as he looked out over the horizon he spotted a pair of riders galloping hard towards the castle. They had stationed numerous scouts to the south as an advanced warning of enemy forces. Now it appeared things were about to finally come to a head. He was not the only one who noticed the retuning scouts, because bells quickly began to ring from the towers. The castle suddenly exploded with activity, as the Umber soldiers began to mount the walls. The goal was to sparsely line the walls to create the impression that they could easily be taken. If the Boltons contented themselves to maintain a siege, they would be able to starve the castle in a short time, even faster with all of Jon's added men. Jon was betting against such tactics. The Boltons were impulsive, and they had their eyes set on more castles than this one. The faster the Umbers were put into submission, the sooner the Boltons could accelerate their ambitions. Jon was shortly joined by Robin Flint and Helman Tallheart, and they all watched on as the Bolton army eventually appeared in the distance. It was clear that the Boltons had brought the bulk of their forces with them, at least 5,000 men by Jon's rough count. The army stopped their march about 200 yards from the castle. A group of mounted soldiers made their way closer, a white flag raised. Jon turned to his two fellow commanders. "See that our men are ready. Conceal as many as you can in the towers. The rest should be on the stairs ready to take to the walls as soon as I give the word. We need them to commit to the attack, so not a moment sooner." "We'll be ready," John Robin Flint replied. "Good. When the time is right, I will retreat to the rear of the castle to give Lord Val the signal to proceed with his attack." Jon descended from the walls to where Mors Umber was in the process of mounting his horse, preparing to go out and meet the Bolton detachment. Once he was seated, Jon moved forward and grabbed the reins of the man's horse. "When you meet the Boltons, I need you to maintain our ruse," Jon instructed Mors. "You know nothing of their dealings with the Lannisters. Act surprised. Then do whatever you need to do, goad them into a fight. I'm sure Ramsay is with them, so refer to him as a bastard as many times as you can." Mors Umber grinned down at him. "If there is one thing we Umbers know how to do, it is how to pick a fight. Don't worry, my prince, I'll rile them up. If they think they are taking this castle, they are sorely mistaken." The urge to mount his own horse and meet the Boltons was strong, but he was counting on Mors Umber to handle the initial pleasantries, without disclosing Jon's presence. The worst that could happen would be Mors agreed to surrender the castle, which Jon would not allow to happen, or the Boltons killed Mors, which would only invigorate Jon's own men. As the gates shut on the riders, Jon navigated through the courtyard full of soldiers, eventually finding Ygritte and Tormund secluded in a corner. Ygritte was leaning on her bow, a quiver of arrows slung over one of her shoulders. He wouldn't confess it to her, but he had the bow made especially for her by the castle's bowyer, so it was of excellent quality. Tormund was likewise armed with a castle-forged sword that Jon had procured for him. What Jon had not personally provided was the small axe and dagger attached to Tormund's hip. Somewhere in the castle, someone was clearly searching for their missing weapons. "Is it time, Stark?" Tormund asked. "I'm itching to stick my blade into something." "Almost," Jon confirmed. "I want you both with me when the fighting starts." "Don't trust us." Ygritte pouted. "I trust you enough to arm you, so that should say enough. You're here because of me, and that means you're my responsibility. I doubt you've ever experienced a siege on a castle beyond the wall. Things will get hectic, so you need to follow my commands. If I say to do something, you will do it. Am I understood?" "Understood," Stark Tormund responded. "Ygritte?" Jon asked, his tone unconsciously softening. "Understood," she stated. "Good. Try not to die. We'll want to move against the front wall. They'll send several volleys into the castle before they attempt to breach it to initially weaken our strength." Jon retrieved his own bow, waiting in the courtyard for Mors Umber's return. It did not take but another few minutes for the gates to open again for the returning riders. Mors rode straight for Jon, a look of satisfaction on his face. "Well?" Jon prompted. "The deed is done. Roose Bolton is calling himself the Warden of the North, so I called him a cunt and told him he could fuck off back to his castle. Then I regaled them with stories of how I made their mothers howl when I fucked them. Well, that should probably do it. As if his statement was an act of premonition, a sudden shout of incoming came from atop the walls. To cover! Jon shouted, practically ripping Mors Umber down from his horse. He pulled the bear of a man to the wall beside Ygritte and Tormund just in time as a storm of arrows suddenly rained upon the castle. Mor's horse looked like a pincushion as no less than 10 arrows impaled the beast, which fell dead to the ground. Many of the men in the castle had sought shelter or raised shields, but more than a handful still fell to the projectiles. Incoming! Came another shout from the walls, and another volley of arrows poured down upon the courtyard. 3 more successive volleys came, but each inflicted less casualties than the one before it. After a brief break, Jon pushed off the wall. Wait here, he instructed. He pushed his way up the crowded stairs and onto the walls, where he first noticed the Umbers had appeared to lose about a quarter of their men. Jon peered over the edge of the walls and saw that the Bolton forces were moving forward. The archers had fallen to the rear and the infantry was moving quickly with the Bolton cavalry behind them. That was who Jon had his eye on. The infantry was slow, easier to pick apart, but the mounted soldiers could retreat faster from the field. Hold! Jon called. To whom he was calling, he was not altogether sure, but he believed it was mostly to steel his own conviction. The infantry was almost upon the walls, hardly bothered by the remaining Bolton archers who were loosing at will. Jon lifted his own bow and knocked an arrow. 20 yards, 15 yards, 10 yards, 5 yards, and then they were at the walls. To the walls. To the fucking walls. Jon turned and ordered at the top of his lungs. He heard the thundering of steps behind him, felt the ground shaking beneath his feet, but wasted no time, pulling back his bowstring and loosing into the lines of Bolton horsemen. By the time the first arrow was free, he had already knocked the second and loosed. He finally turned to his right and saw Ygritte with her own bow drawn back, firing onto the attackers. All around him the sky was suddenly inundated with hundreds of arrows descending with lethal intent. The Bolton army was in a state of confusion, seemingly uncomprehending why their soldiers were beginning to drop by the dozens. The infantry had temporarily halted, apparently stuck between the choices of retreating and attempting to assail the walls. Fear of Roose Bolton's punishment for retreating won out, because the infantry pressed forward again, ladders being raised. Defend the walls! Jon shouted. These are the king's walls. These are our walls. No Bolton traitor sets foot on our walls. Jon noticed a Bolton soldier had made it halfway up one of the ladders and placed an arrow through the soldier's ear, watching him fall limp and lifeless to the throngs below him. Down, Stark! Ygritte's voice called from his right. Without thinking, he ducked down, just in time to watch the Wilderling's arrow pierce the shoulder of another soldier who had made it to the top of wall and was about to attempt to strike Jon. Standing quickly again, Jon pulled his sword from its sheath and finished the soldier off, removing his head from his shoulders. He turned back to Ygritte, who offered him a smirk, before turning to loose her arrows again. Behind her, Tormund was busy stabbing at ascending soldiers with his sword, while using his axe to splinter the top rungs of the ladders. The man fought like a wild animal, almost laughing as his blades struck. The bodies at the foot of the walls were quickly beginning to pile, making it harder for subsequent waves of attackers to get forward, leaving them exposed to relentless streams of arrows from the castle's defenders. The Bolton infantry had already been close to halved. While that in itself was satisfying, Jon could see in the distance that the cavalry was getting restless and uncertain with the turn of the tides, to the point where they had retreated back out of range of arrow strike. They were also far enough back that he could not risk sending his own men down from the hills. They would be left too exposed to a devastating horse charge. He wanted to break the Boltons, and that would not happen if he allowed them to retreat back to the Dread Fort. The only way he could think to keep them in the field was tactically illogical, and likely crazy, but it just might be crazy enough to work. Jon ordered Ygritte and Tormund to stay where they were, while he descended down back into the courtyard, where Mors Umber was directing reinforcements where they were needed. Are the gates holding? Jon asked. Barely a splinter, Mors proudly replied. I need you to let them break through, Jon ordered. Break through? Are you fucking mad, boy? We need to draw in their horses. The only way we do that now is if they think they have a chance at taking the castle. We still have the advantage. They have to funnel their men through the narrow gates. We'll surround them from below and pick them off from above. We've won the day and you simply want to let them waltz into the castle. Imagine the shame on my name as the Umber who couldn't hold his own damn castle. I won't do it, boy. Jon surged forward and grabbed the man by the collar, which exceedingly awkward given their differences in size. Jon would not be deterred though. I'm not your fucking boy. I am your prince, and I speak with the authority of your king. Fuck your pride. You will open those gates, because I have ordered you to open them, or I will remove your head from your shoulders. Have I made myself clear? There was clearly still a tempest brewing behind Umber's remaining eye, but eventually, he relented. I'll see it done. You don't need to open it, just weaken it enough to let them break through. Jon didn't give the man another glance, moving around the courtyard until he located an abandoned shield. To me. Form lines. They are about to breach the gate. The news that the gates were going to fall was enough to encourage the men in the courtyard to take up arms around him, effectively creating a semicircle around the gate. He was suddenly joined on his left by Robin Flint and on his right by Tormund. What's happening? Flint questioned. I thought we had beat them back. We did. I am letting them in, Jon answered, not looking at him. A booming laugh drowned out Flint's indignant reply from his right. You've got balls, Stark. Giant, fucking balls. Jon had no opportunity to reply because there was a great crack as the doors imploded inwards, which was followed by a giant cheer from the Bolton attackers. Here they come. Hold your ground. Jon shouted. The first wave of attackers ran straight into their lines without any forethought, simply trying to bodily pierce their way through. The defensive lines held against the charge. Jon pushed the closest attacker back with his shield, then plunged his sword forward into the man's stomach. Another came behind him, attempting to run Jon through with a spear. Jon turned his body, protecting his torso, but taking a minor cut on his arm. As the attacker's momentum carried him forward, Jon sliced down on his spear, then slid the sword up straight into the spearman's throat, his breached airway spraying blood in all directions. The rush of men through continued consistently, but the Boltons were unable to make any headway, especially as arrows from the walls hit them as soon as they made it to the castle's courtyard. There were so many dead bodies, that the blood was beginning to pool. Jon, seeing that his men had things in hand, retreated backward and made his way back up to the walls to Ygritte, who was continuing to effectively lose her arrows. Jon looked over the wall and saw exactly what he had hoped. Upon the breach of the gates, the Boltons had committed everything forward. The Bolton archers who had initially retreated to the rear had been sent in behind the infantry, and the mounted soldiers had moved in closer, prepared to clean up after the infantry. Behind the main cavalry, Jon could see a small group of riders, which he had no doubt was Roose and his bastard. They were close enough. Jon pushed away from the wall, ready to go signal Lord Val to begin his attack, but was stopped short when he heard a woman scream beside him. His breath catching in his chest, he turned and watched as Ygritte fell to the ground. He rushed over, dropping to his knees beside her. She was clutching at her left shoulder where an arrow was embedded. Ygritte cried out as Jon pulled her back against the wall. I'm fine, Stark, Ygritte growled, clearly in pain. Go do what you need to do. As soon as I've seen to this wound. Lean forward. Jon helped Ygritte lean forward, and he saw the arrowhead had exited through the back of her shoulder. The arrow passed through. I'm going to break off the head, so I can pull the shaft out. Brace yourself. Just fucking do it. Jon wrapped the fingers on his left hand around the exit point, gripping the shaft to hold it steady, while his right hand snapped off the head. Luckily, he managed not to jostle the shaft and cause her additional pain. Unfortunately, the next part would. I'm going to pull out the shaft. Jon suddenly felt Ygritte's fingers gripping his thigh, preparing herself. Jon slowly pulled the shaft from her shoulder, feeling her fingernails dig into his leg as she felt the pain of the arrow pulling through her flesh. A rush of blood bubbled out of the wound as the arrow pulled free of flesh. Jon reached beneath his leather jerkin, tearing a strip of his tunic off to use as a bandage. He tied it tightly around the wound to slow the bleeding. That'll have to do for now until the Maester can see to it, Jon stated, helping to push her more firmly against the wall. If you're finished acting like a woman, go win the damn battle, Ygritte huffed, though John could also sense affection and appreciation behind her tone. "As you command," John grinned, giving Ygritte a final once-over before taking off along the walls once again. Weaving through scores of defenders still on the wall, he finally made it to the rear of the castle where he had stored another bow. Dipping an arrow in a container of pitch, he lit the projectile in a nearby brazier. Lifting his bow skyward, he loosed his shot high into the hills. As it flew, he heard an answering call from his concealed forces as they prepared to make their descent into the battle. The sky was dark, but John could see the men quickly making their way down the rough terrain, the moonlight glinting off of their spears and swords. John quickly returned to the front of the castle, watching as his men suddenly converged from both sides of the castle, falling upon the unsuspecting Bolton forces. Half of the force hammered the Bolton archers and infantry from behind, while the other half charged the Bolton horsemen. While the mountain clansmen were not the most disciplined, they were fierce fighters, and quickly caused panic among their enemies. John's eyes strayed from the battle, keeping them locked on the Bolton lord. They were rattled at the turn of the events, the commanders arguing amongst themselves. John could not let them get away. He made his way back down to the courtyard, where the flow of Boltons into the castle had been completely stemmed. He found Mors Umber trying to get the castle's entrance clear of bodies. "Umber!" John called, as he approached. "We need horses. We need to go after Roose Bolton." Mors Umber complied with the request, sending his men to bring a dozen horses from the stables. John rounded up men to ride with him, including Robin Flint and a surprisingly eager Tormund. The man's face and beard were dripping with blood, clearly not his own. The 12 riders formed up in the courtyard, and John turned to give them their instructions. "We're going after Roose Bolton and his spawn. Don't get caught up in the other fighting. Stay close by me and ride hard." John spun his mount towards the open gates and called, "Ghost." The white direwolf appeared as if out of thin air, his muzzle streaked with blood. The wolf stared at John expectantly. "Lead the way." Without a further word, Ghost took off through the entryway, and John encouraged his horse to follow. As John made it out into the open, he was met with the sight of unbelievable carnage. Bodies littered the ground, and the fighting was still ongoing, with soldiers slipping and crunching on the numerous bodies beneath them. Ghost was like a blur navigating the battlefield, and John was doing his best to follow the path. Most of the Bolton horsemen had been forced off their mounts, fighting for their lives against the invigorated Northmen. Several Bolton soldiers took swings at John, but slashed one soldier and removed another's arm. He finally broke through the thickest of the fighting and pushed his horse faster when he saw that Bolton was breaking away from the battlefield. Roose and his men would have likely made it away unscathed had it not been for the white direwolf on their heels. Ghost weaved his way into the pack of riders and leaped onto the back of one of the Bolton guards, who John could hear scream in agony from 50 yards away. The presence of the direwolf startled the horses, causing several of them to rear up, and at the speed the horses had been galloping, an inevitable collision occurred, causing a pile-up of riders and beasts on the ground. John and his men made up the distance in a short time, and as they approached the enemy, they discounted and charged. There had been at least 24 Bolton riders with their lord, but at least a third of them were either dead or writhing in pain on the ground from their fall. The rest of them had formed up to meet John and his men. He could see Ramsay pulling up a clearly injured Roose Bolton from below his horse. John met the first Bolton guard, pushing aside an errant strike and using the pommel of his sword to shatter the guard's jaw, tearing away flesh and sending teeth flying into the air. Not giving the guard a chance to recover, he slashed across the man's sword arm, then impaled him through the sternum, piercing his heart. His sword was frustratingly stuck in the man, which left him open to attack. Another guard made a run for him, but Tormund threw the weight of his body at the guard, sending him to the ground on his back. Tormund then proceeded to drive his axe into the top of the man's skull, cleaving it in half and spilling his brains onto the ground. John, finally able to free his sword, watched on helplessly as Robin Flint took a sword through his stomach. Flint shoved his own dagger into his attacker's neck, felling him, before crashing to the ground, clutching his leaking wound. There was nothing John could do for the man, so he turned and approached the 2 Boltons, Roose to his left, clearly nursing an injury to his leg, while Ramsay, crazed, looked behind his small, beady eyes. Neither seemed to be aware of the crouched white wolf that has snuck up behind them, waiting on a hair trigger to pounce. Jon takes slow steps forward and points the tip of his sword at Roose Bolton. Lord Bolton, you have broken your oaths to House Stark, you have betrayed your liege lord and your king, Robb Stark. You are a traitor, and I detain you, as such. And who are you to take such an action? Roose Bolton questioned, pain lacing his words. Robb Stark betrayed the true King Joffrey Baratheon, who has named me Warden of the North. I am Jon Stark, son of Eddard Stark, and brother to the king in the north, Robb Stark. The bastard of Winterfell. Ramsay laughed. You are nothing. And you are? Jon questioned, brows raised. Bastard of the Dreadfort, is it not? I was given the Stark name by a king, a true king in the north, crowned by his lords. You were given the Bolton name by a boy pretender without a drop of Baratheon blood inside him, born of his own uncle's seed. As far as the north is concerned, you remain Ramsay Snow, a bastard. I will have your head, bastard. Ramsay snarled, sword raised. Then I will flay every inch of skin from your body, and parade you through the halls of Winterfell before feeding you to my hounds. You are crazed. Jon smirked. Your army is beaten. We will raise another, Snow. Ramsay responded. You will not get the chance, Jon stated, looking past the two men to his companion. Ghost, secure Lord Bolton. I need him alive. He is to be subject to King Robb's justice in person back at Winterfell. The dire wolf immediately moved, leaping up and biting onto the back of Roose Bolton's armor, harshly slamming him to the ground. Ghost hovered over the beaten lord, teeth bared, daring him to move. Jon turned back to Ramsay. You, on the other hand, you are a murderer. You have spilled the blood of innocent northerners at Long Lake and elsewhere. Your life is forfeit, and I sentence you to die. Will you submit? Jon did not receive a vocal response. Instead, Ramsay ran straight at Jon, sword raised. Ramsay cleaved his sword down at Jon, trying to split him in two, but Jon sidestepped the strike, bringing his own sword in a horizontal two-handed slice, which Ramsay only just recovered enough to block. Ramsay was relentless, an animal backed into a corner. He hacked wildly at Jon, forcing Jon to dance around him. One of the strikes nicked Jon on his thigh, opening a shallow gash. The pain angered Jon, and he punched Ramsay dead center in his face, breaking his nose and sending blood pouring down his chin. Jon could not say whether the man was dizzied by the strike, or simply crazed, but Ramsay smiled back, his tongue darting out to lick at the blood pouring from his nose. Seeing Ramsay about to strike again, Jon reached up with his left hand, catching the wrist of his sword hand held high in the air. Jon came in closer, to the point his and Ramsay's noses were almost touching. He locked gazes with Ramsay, watching the man's eyes widen as the tip of Jon's sword pierced his abdomen. Jon twisted the sword, intent on causing the monster as much pain as possible. The sword swirled around Ramsay's intestines, stirring them up until Jon finally drove the sword upward, through Ramsay's chest cavity and likely up into his throat. Blood dribbled from Ramsay's mouth. He hacked out two loud, dramatic coughs before he fell limp against Jon, dead. Chapter 36, Chapter 36. Chapter text. Tyrion Lannister sat alone in the small council chamber, internally contemplating whether the upcoming meeting would bear good news for a change, or whether it would be a continuation of the months of fuck-ups that had plagued the capital. To put it plainly, Tyrion was miserable, everyone in the city was miserable. His father was the only one who seemed to be able to hide it, but Tyrion could tell that even the great Tywin Lannister was beginning to unravel slowly. The Hand of the King had lost his home to Robb Stark, and all but lost his heir. Jaime was bedridden, nothing but a living husk, whether from the wounds themselves or from the knowledge that he was a defeated cripple who would never ride into battle again. It was hard for the Maesters to tell. Tyrion loved his brother, but his legendary arrogance had finally caught up with him. If Jaime had simply lost a limb, it would have not been the end of the world, but Robb Stark had also made sure that Jaime would never carry on the Lannister name as Lord of Casterly Rock, at least legitimately, thoughts of his golden-haired nephews and niece flashing through his thoughts. This meant that Tyrion was the only one who could, a fact which brought Tywin Lannister no small measure of shame. While Tywin's simmering anger caused the entire castle to walk on eggshells, it was nothing compared to Tyrion's dear sister. Cersei had been nearly catatonic upon learning of her lover's condition, but that had quickly turned into unbridled rage. She had the patience for no one, lashing out at any who displeased her. Cersei had murdered 2 servants in just the past few weeks for minor failings, shoving one off of a balcony and brutally stabbing another at least a dozen times. Apparently, Jaime's cock was the only thing that had kept her from coming completely undone. The worst of it though, was that wretched boy who called himself king. Tyrion could think of no other person less suited to rule a kingdom. Joffrey was, to put it plainly, a monster. He enjoyed torture and inflicting pain on others. To try and restrain him, they had tried to calm the boy's appetites with whores. However, with the unspeakable things Joffrey had made them do, often leaving the whores maimed and broken, the brothel owners in King's Landing were now less than willing to offer their services. Now Joffrey simply resorted to raping the serving girls at his whim. Joffrey's behaviors were awful on a good day, so the setbacks and defeats at the hands of the king in the north left the boy seething, ordering ridiculous attacks and troop movements that Tywin always ensured never happened. The last royal decree had been to conscript every boy and man over 13 years of age into a royal army to march north. The king did not seem to grasp the fact that he was despised by a great portion of the populace and that arming that same populace, and telling them they should march to their deaths in the frigid north was a recipe for a bloody uprising. As Tyrion heard footsteps approaching, he quickly refilled his wine cup, throwing the bitter liquid back in a single gulp. He needed something to fortify his resolve for the next hour, and there was no better option. Tyrion lounged back as he watched Tywin, Cersei, Mace Tyrell, Pycelle, and Kevan Lannister pour into the room. Tywin noticeably sat in the king's chair. "Will my beloved nephew, the king, not be gracing us with his presence?" Tyrion questioned. "The king is otherwise engaged," Cersei snapped. Tyrion snorted. "Has he stolen a baby to use as a pincushion?" "Enough," Tyrion Lord Tywin ordered, intense eyes flashing. "There are important matters to be discussed. The king will be updated on those matters accordingly." "Of course," Father Tyrion responded, biting his tongue. "What news does the Hand have to share with the council?" "This morning I received a raven from one of our spies in the north. It would seem that Roose Bolton was defeated in battle and captured." Kevan Lannister blustered at the pronouncement. "Our most recent reports have been certain that Robb Stark is still in the Westerlands, as is the bulk of his army. Roose Bolton had thousands of men in the north, more than enough to bring it to heel. Who in the blazes was able to defeat him?" "Stark's bastard brother ambushed the Boltons as they attempted to siege Last Hearth, aided by Northern Mountain clansmen," Tywin responded, his face barely able to mask what Tyrion knew was a boiling internal fury. "Savages," Mace Tyrell grumbled. "No better than wildlings." Tyrion could not help but roll his eyes at the fool. Those savages were enough to overcome a well-equipped Bolton army. Why was the Stark bastard in the north to begin with? Cersei questioned. "A question to which I cannot answer," Tywin admitted. "I don't believe the original intention was to confront the Boltons. The timing does not line up, and I doubt Stark would have relied on a force made up of mountain clans to confront Roose Bolton if such an attack had been planned out in advance." "I agree," Tyrion added. "The brother was in the north for another reason. It may have been just a matter of reinforcing Winterfell. Stark's entire family is currently there, after all." The obvious answer is usually the correct one. Just as Tywin was about to counter, a Lannister guard entered the chamber, a small scroll in his hand. Tyrion watched in curiosity as the soldier approached his father. "Pardon, my lord. There was a messenger bearing this. Said to deliver it only to you. Also said he'd been delayed and the new one is several weeks old." Tywin took the scroll from the young man, waving him away with only the slightest of acknowledgements. The hand of the king slowly broke the seal on the parchment, unfurling it completely. As he took the words in, Tyrion could see the old warrior's fists clenched, his jaw rigid. "What is it, father?" Cersei questioned. "Robb Stark has taken the twins. Walder Free is dead." The room fell into an uncomfortable, stunned silence. Tywin paid Tyrion no mind as he reached to refill his cup, which was a testament to the precariousness of their situation. Tyrion drained his cup once more, gathering the fortitude to break the quiet. "I don't need to state the obvious, but I'll do so anyway. If the Boltons and Freys are off the table, then we have no hope of overtaking Stark in the north, not that there was much of a hope, to begin with." The idea of buying off the Boltons and Freys had never been something that had sat well with him, for a variety of reasons. Cersei sneered. You would give up so easily. With control of the twins, Stark has a stranglehold on the North, Tyrion stated. Marching a force north and expecting anything other than slaughter is an utter fantasy. Cersei did not relent. What do you know about battle, you little monster? More than you, Tyrion countered. And what is your solution? Tywin interjected, the sibling back and forth. Tyrion glared at his sister once more before shifting his gaze to his father. There is only one thing left to do. We negotiate terms of peace with Stark. Surrender. Kevan frowned. I didn't say surrender, Tyrion replied. It is time to face hard truths. The North and the Riverlands are lost to us. That is a fact, and no decision we make will change it. Stark is no conqueror. He will be satisfied with those holdings. And the fact that he currently holds our ancestral seat. Tywin asked. Again, we negotiate. We offer to recognize his claim to the North and Riverlands, something he has regardless of our recognition of it, and in exchange we get back our home. Maybe we give up some land in the exchange, maybe a political marriage, but nothing to weep over. There are 4 factions left on the board. Joffrey in King's Landing, Stannis in the south, Stark in the north, and this alleged Targaryen across the sea. Stark is the most powerful, and I'm sure the most reasonable, out of that group. It only makes sense to take an enemy like that off the board and focus on the other, more direct threats. What worry is the little Targaryen bitch to us? Cersei questioned. I'm sure you've heard the rumors about her dragons, Tyrion stated, his tone biting. If a day arises when this girl comes to Westeros, she will be focused on King's Landing and the Iron Throne, not Stark in the north. She will be our problem. And who knows, maybe if we make nice with Stark, he will see the common good in preventing dragons from burning down Westeros. We've lost the war with Stark. It is time we think beyond it. Done with his speech, Tyrion sat back in his chair, carefully watching his father's expression, for truly it was the only one that mattered. He braced himself, ready to withstand a barrage of vitriol for the mere suggestion that the great Tywin Lannister would admit defeat. However, instead of an immediate backlash, his father seemed to be in deep contemplation. Finally, the Hand stood, establishing his dominance over the room. As much as I am loath to admit it, Tyrion's perspective on this matter is not off the mark. Stark's position in the north is entrenched, and our only ally, if he can even be counted as an ally, is Baelish, who has half of the Vale rebelling against him. Sometimes, when the odds are not in your favor, the only prudent decision is to retreat and live to fight another day, on your terms. Kevan Lannister interjected. While I understand the wisdom of a truce, what guarantee is there that Stark will even be amenable to one at this point? He is winning. Add to that Jaime threw his brother off a tower, my niece and nephew murdered Ned Stark's closest friend, and we offered bribes to Stark's bannermen to assassinate him. I can confidently say, brother, that if the tables were turned, you would smother out the threat without mercy, not humor the thought of truce. We are Lannisters and they are Starks. They have their ideals, we have our ambitions. Stark will seek peace if the opportunity presents it, Tywin reasoned. And Stark will simply trust our word. Kevan questioned. We'll provide some insurance, Tywin stated, looking back to Tyrion. Tyrion was instantly discomfited. And that means what, exactly? Such important negotiations cannot take place via Raven and should be handled in person. That is why you shall travel north to meet Stark and secure a truce. As part of that truce, and as a show of good faith, you shall remain in the north as a representative of King Joffrey and guest of House Stark. Tyrion gripped the table in front of him with both hands. You mean to make me a hostage? Your only functioning son and heir is to be a hostage to the king in the north. Tywin scoffed. Don't be dramatic, Tyrion. Firstly, you can put this nonsense of you being my heir out of your head. There will never come a day when you shall become the head of this house. You may be my blood, but I would never dishonor the legacy of House Lannister with such an action. If Jaime is unable to take his place as heir, Tommen shall be named heir, or I will take a wife and sire one myself. I shall hear no more on that from you. Secondly, do not be concerned about your safety. Stark will not harm you, regardless of how long we are faithful to this truce. Tyrion was momentarily stunned. The harshness of his own father's words and the humiliation of them being thrown out before the rest of the room was like a dagger twisted in his guts, being maligned for things beyond his control. He steeled himself, suppressing both the hurt and rage. Regardless of how long we are faithful. Meaning you do not intend to be faithful? Tyrion questioned. For a time, and for so long as it is to our advantage. We will let Stark disarm and become complacent, while we reinforce our strength. It may be time to seek outside assistance, potentially from the likes of the Golden Company. That would be expensive, Pycelle wheezed out. I am sure Lord Tyrell, as Master of Coin, will manage to scrounge up the funds. Tywine simpered at Mace Tyrell, who rose high in his seat, eating up the attention. Of course. I shall see to it immediately. Tywine finally sat back in his chair. Excellent. I knew we could count on you. It appears we are settled then. Tyrion will immediately prepare to journey north, with a small escort. We shall provide advance notice of his journey so that he is to be expected and not delayed. Cersei objected. The king will not agree to this. He will not simply submit to the idea of losing his kingdoms. Joffrey will do what I tell him, Tywine answered. If that boy wants to survive, let alone retain his crown, he will listen. If not, he can abdicate and Tommen may take the crown instead. Cersei and Tywine continued to bicker. Tyrion had ceased paying attention, instead trying to control his jumbled thoughts. He had always been proud of his house, regardless of his father's and sister's unrelenting scorn. Yet there was only so much one man could take. Now he was to be his family's sacrificial lamb. He was to be a hostage, but a worthless one. Robb Stark holding a dagger to Tyrion's neck would not give Tywine a second of pause from his goals. His father had noted that Lannisters were driven by ambition, so maybe it was time he saw to his own. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX. If it was not for the fact that he was the king, Robb would have openly wept at the first sight of Winterfell. He held off against the urge, but just barely. He rode at the front of the column of his army, thousands of Northerners behind him, also glad to be home. A small force would remain camped around Winterfell, but many would be returning to their castles and lands, preparing as best they could for winter. Robb was dressed in his finest, bronze crown upon his head for his first trip to the north as its king. Winterfell was ready to meet him. Guards lined the path up to the castle, holding back throngs of people who had come for a glimpse of their king. There were shouts and cheering as Robb made his way closer and closer to the castle. He did his best to acknowledge as many of his people as he could, offering a smile or a wave, especially to the small children who sat on their parents' shoulders, some even waving small Stark banners. The castle gates were open in welcome, and Grey Wind, who had been lazily trotting at Robb's side, bounded suddenly through the gates, no doubt sensing his siblings within the castle. Robb picked his pace up slightly, passing through the gates and into the central courtyard where his family waited. Behind them, a pile of direwolves leaped upon each other, enjoying their reunion. Robb saw his mother, Sansa, Arya, Bran, and Rickon, and slightly behind them Shireen Baratheon. He smiled at them before his eyes fell on a sight that took his breath more than the frigid cold ever could. Margaery stood beside Catelyn, a thick set of furs wrapped around her shoulders. Her dress of grey and green was striking, but Robb's eyes were drawn to where her hands rested on her greatly rounded stomach. A sigh of relief escaped his lips when he realized that he had not missed the birth of his child. His gaze shifted to his wife's face, red-tinted cheeks slightly more rounded than the last time he had seen her so many months ago. Robb dismounted his horse, and in just a few hurried paces he had swept his queen into his arms. He breathed in her scent deeply. Her arms remained around his neck while his own journeyed down onto her abdomen. He was struck speechless. "Welcome home, my king," Margaery whispered into his ear. Robb drew back, staring into her slightly wet eyes. "It is good to be home. You look even more beautiful than the last time I saw you. I feel as big as a castle, but the sentiment is appreciated." Margaery grinned. "I was beginning to think you would not make it back in time. I tell our child every evening they must hold on just a bit longer." Robb smiled like a fool. "I'm here now." He captured his wife's lips briefly before turning to the rest of his family. Rob's mother embraced him tightly, for several long moments, reluctant to let go. Finally, she pulled back, but Rob could see something else in her eyes. "What is it, mother?" Caitlin looked reluctant but answered still. "I don't mean to spoil your homecoming, but there are several important matters that require the king's attention. It's probably best you assemble your lords in the Great Hall." Chapter 37, Chapter 37. Chapter text. Having long since removed his crown, Rob massaged his pulsing temples. Sat on his newly constructed throne from within the Great Hall, he did his best to stave off the rage that boiled within him, his mother having just revealed the extent of the Boltons' treachery. A part of him was not surprised by it, but still, just the fact of it had him incensed. Taking a calming breath, he looked towards where his mother stood in front of him. The rest of his lords and commanders were blustering at the Bolton deceit from their seats in the hall behind her. "Where is Roose Bolton now?" Rob questioned. "Held at last," half his mother answered. "Has there been any word from the Dread Fort?" "None. It is unclear as to who currently controls the castle." "And what is Jon's status?" "Per his raven, he has continued his trek to the wall," Caitlin answered. "He was unsure of how long it would take for you to make it to Winterfell, and did not wish to delay any longer in his original task. The mountain clans have remained to provide additional security to Last Hearth." Rob stood from his throne, steadying his breathing. "House Bolton has betrayed the North, betrayed their king and House Stark. I hereby strip House Bolton of all lands and titles. For his crimes, I sentence Roose Bolton to die." Rob paused, looking to his right where Margaery was seated, a hand rested on her stomach. He sighed, already regretting his next words. "On the morrow, I shall assemble a force and march on the Dread Fort. We shall take and secure the castle, with or without force, as needed." "Rob, you've only just arrived," his mother fretted. "It must be done," Rob asserted. "I won't leave these traitors to regroup and plot against us, especially with winter approaching. They have done enough damage as it is." A throat cleared from the center of the room. The great Jon stood, and the room fell to silence. "Begging your pardon, your grace, but Lady Caitlin speaks true. It wouldn't do for our king to miss the birth of his heir. Leave the task to me. I'll be marching that way to get home. We'll remove every last sack of Bolton shit from that castle, and all the North will be better for it." Rob's first instinct was to decline the great Jon, but another glance back at his hopeful queen stifled him. He truly did not wish to strike out again so soon. His body was weary from months of fighting and travel, and there were a plethora of other responsibilities that needed to be seen in preparation for the coming months. It would also not look well to deny the great Jon and question his ability to see the task done. Rob, his decision made, nodded. "Lord Umber, I charge you to take the Dread Fort and remove any remnants of the Bolton army. Strip down and burn every flayed man banner. Destroy every relic of that house. What of the people? Servants and craftsmen may remain in the castle to see to its maintenance, should they swear loyalty to House Stark. Any Bolton soldier who surrenders peacefully shall be given an option, the Night's Watch or exile. And I don't mean exile out of the North, exile out of Westeros. I will not have them going south and joining our enemies. If neither of those options is acceptable, then you have my orders to execute them for treason." "And the castle?" Lord Umber inquired. Rob paused for a moment, considering the best course of action. He'd never had this sort of responsibility, which was essentially bestowing true lordship upon another. There were many options available to him, many who had served him bravely and deserved such an honor. However, there was only one name that he truly considered. Some of his men may consider it nepotistic, but that was his prerogative as king. Rob proclaimed, "The Dread Fort shall be no more. I pass on all titles, lands, rights, and honors formerly held by House Bolton to my brother, Jon Stark, now Lord Jon Stark. He shall hold this title and it shall pass on to his children after. I shall leave the responsibility retitling of the castle to its new lord. We shall have a formal ceremony for Lord Stark upon his return." Rob turned and gestured to a serving girl who brought him a cup of wine. He raised it high. "To Lord Stark." A chorus of voices in the hall mimicked his words heartily. Lord Umber called his attention once more. Until Lord Stark returns from his duties, who shall see to the management of the castle. As you are leading the forces to retake the castle, I can only see that on allying with House Umber. Robb turned to where members of his guard were congregating. Small Jon Umber. You have served me well in my Kingsguard, but I release you from those duties, at least for the near future. You shall serve as Castellan of the former Dread Fort until my brother is able to take over management of the castle. The Small Jon stepped over from where he had formerly been perched and kneeled before his king. Thank you for this responsibility, Your Grace. Robb laughed lightly. You thank me now, but it is likely to be much more work than guarding me here in Winterfell. He pulled the Small Jon up from where he knelt and surrendered his still half-full cup to the man, before turning to the room at large. No more business tonight. It has been a long journey home, and there will be more trials to come. But for tonight, the hospitality of Winterfell is yours to enjoy. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX rested back against the tub. Margaery was seated in front of him, lying back against his chest. She moaned lightly as his hands, coated in the scented bath oils, glided over the contours of her rounded belly. He was fascinated by it, both by how much it had grown since they had last been together, and just simply by the thought that their child resided within. "I wish I had been able to do this every evening over these many months," Robb stated. Leaning forward, he placed his lips against his wife's neck. "I would not have objected. How have you been?" "Not so bad. Tired and hungry most days, but otherwise things have gone smoothly." "I'm grateful for that," Robb said, his right hand now sliding up to palm Margaery's heavy breast. Just like her stomach, they had grown much since he had last seen her, and he was just as fascinated. "I have missed you, but it has been nice getting to know your family. They have been very supportive. Sansa follows me around like a puppy, but she is so very sweet." Robb laughed at the image of Sansa pulling at Margaery's skirts. "You are everything that she has always dreamed of being. I think she has matured some. I have delicately tried to disavow her from some of her more fantastical thoughts about the life of a lady. She expects that you are going to arrange a marriage for her soon." Robb grimaced, hiding his face in Margaery's damp hair. "And I was so relaxed just a moment ago." "My poor husband," his wife giggled. "It is something you will have to give thought to. You can find a young man who will be a good match for her. There is no reason it must be unpleasant. I would never make a match just for political gain. I'll not see my sister unhappy, fuck the consequences." "Spoken like the best of brothers," Margaery praised. "If you had to propose a name right this moment, who would you say?" "If I was under the pain of excruciating torture and had to give a name, I would still not do it, but just for the benefit of you at this moment, it would likely be Brynden Blackwood. He is close enough in age to Sansa, and he is heir to Raventree Hall, a respected house, and ally. It would further secure our ties to the Riverlands. I would suggest Lucas, as I know him better, but he is a second son." "That sounds like politics," Margaery interrupted. "Maybe, but it is also me knowing what Sansa expects from such a match. If she came to me and told me she preferred Lucas, I doubt I would disagree. My mother on the other hand—" "Don't be so cynical, my love. It is my lovely queen's fault for getting me so worked up with this frightening topic." "Well then it must be your queen's responsibility to relax you again." Margaery slowly slid forward, gripping the sides of the tub as she went. With some effort, she managed to pull herself up to stand. Robb was caught between making sure she did not slip, and watching the droplets of water on her back slither down to her ass. Robb's protective instinct overcame though when she actually tried to step out of the bath. He almost slipped himself when he hastened out of the tub first to guide her out. "I have done this myself for months, you know," she huffed. Robb practically lifted her out of the bath and onto the floor of their chambers. "You will have to indulge my worrying. This is new to me and I have many months of it to make up for. No more worrying tonight." Without even taking the time to dry herself, Margaery laced her fingers through his and led him over to their bed. Letting him go, she crawled onto the bed, hands and knees dragging her forward. Margaery stopped in the center, looking back over her shoulder at him. "I'm waiting, my king." Rob shook himself from his stupor, swiftly moving to meet his wife. As he stopped behind her, his hand traveled slowly up from her thigh until dragged along the slick lips of her sex. His fingers pleasured her steadily while his other hand slipped up and down his hardened cock. He delayed only a moment more before he placed the tip of his cock through her folds and sheathed himself fully. "Fuck," Rob groaned, his body tingling in pleasure as he leaned down over Marigari's back. His mouth latched onto her neck for a few moments, sucking at her skin before pulling back. His hands gripped onto her plentiful ass, beginning to thrust in and out her sex. While he was mindful of her condition, the arousing moans from his wife told him his forceful thrusts and pace were good for her. He luxuriated in the feeling of being inside his wife for the first time in months. When he felt her walls begin to pulse around his cock, he reached down and took a breast in hand, which caused her to practically howl. His pace quickened, his end approaching, and with final frantic pumps of his hips, he spent inside her. "Gods, did I miss you," Rob groaned, slipping from inside her. He carefully helped to roll Margari to her side, before laying down across from her. His hand returned to caressing her stomach. "You look even more beautiful like this." Margari smiled at him, though he could see exhaustion in her eyes. "Then we shall have to make efforts to keep me in this condition regularly." Rob brushed his lips against hers. "Only so many times as you would like, love. The burden of it falls on you, not I." "You are sweet, Rob." She nuzzled herself into his shoulder, her breathing calming. "Welcome home," her final words before drifting into slumber. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX the wall far exceeded them. It was an amazing sight and actually lived up to the stories of his youth. You really think your ancestors built that to keep free folk out? John turned and looked at Ygritte, who rode beside him. She raised her brows at him in question. I have my doubts. If the wall itself had exceeded his expectations, Castle Black was the complete, disappointing opposite. It looked to be in a state of disrepair, and John was reasonably confident that he could assail it himself with 50 men. As their force approached the castle, the gates opened, and several men dressed in black stepped out to meet them. The man in front was the oldest of the group, with hair mostly grey, and had a sour expression on his face. I am Sir Alliser Thorne, Master-at-Arms of Castle Black. What business do you have here? The Black brother questioned, hand resting on his sword. John, dismounting his horse, walked over to stand before the man. I am John Stark. I come at the command of Robb Stark, king in the north end of the Riverlands. A false king, Sir Alliser stated. John bristled. Hold your tongue, sir. I will not suffer insults against my king and family. What is it you want? We have come at the request of your Lord Commander. The king has charged me with reinforcing the wall and investigating the increase of wilderling attacks in the south. I'd like to meet with Lord Commander Mormont if you will lead me to him. That won't be possible, Sir Alliser responded. Why is that? Because Lord Commander Mormont has not been heard from in months. He led 100 men beyond the wall on an expedition and none have since returned. John was shaken by the news. Things were more dire than he had expected. Who is in charge now? The responsibilities for the castle have fallen to me, the Lord Steward and Maester Aemon. And how many men remain in the castle? John inquired. Less than 200, but the Lord Commander took most of our best fighters with him beyond the wall. Less than 200, John repeated. He doubted whether the Night's Watch would last another month from what he could see. As the condition of the Lord Commander is unknown, I shall see to the security of the castle and the wall. Sir Alliser immediately turned red. You have no right, Enough, Sir Alliser, John ordered. I am not here to take over the Night's Watch. I am here to make sure it does not crumble along with the wall. My duty is not to your pride, but to the thousands of people who live in the south. I expect that we shall have your hospitality. Sir Alliser looked like he wanted to fight on, but he seemingly managed to restrain himself. We can accommodate you and your commanders in the castle, but we don't have the provisions to maintain the rest of your men. We've brought provisions with us, John assured. I'll assign men to the defense of the castle and the wall, the rest shall set up camp south of the castle. Should we require more provisions, I shall see that they are secured. Very well, Sir Alisa stated. Shall we tour the defenses? Yes, but first I'd like to meet your maester. I need to get word back to the king of my arrival. Chapter 38, Chapter 38. Chapter text. Jon had never seen such a sorry group of men in his life as the ones whom he passed traversing through Castle Black. The dregs that had been left behind by the Lord Commander looked as if they would drop their weapons and run at the first sign of a wilderling child, let alone an army. Half of the brothers of the watch cowered away from Jon, attempting to avoid eye contact. Jon could only presume some were seemingly afraid that a royal had shown up to reinstitute their original sentences and take their heads. He could only think that sending the worst criminals in Westeros to defend the realm was perhaps not the most prudent policy. Jon's men were working to set up camp outside the castle and to reinforce its defenses while he sought out the maester. That cunt, Sir Alistair, had bristled at each of Jon's commands, but he couldn't be concerned at the man's damaged pride. There were more important things to worry about. He had been told that the old maester was likely to be found in the library, which was located underground. Inside the room, which reeked of mold, were shelves of scrolls and books, some of which looked as old as the wall itself. There was a small table in the middle of the room. Seated, face buried in a large tome, was a rotund young man with unkempt dark hair. Though Jon was already halfway inside, this man had failed to notice him. Jon loudly cleared his throat, and the man jumped, his mouth letting out a high-pitched shriek. Noticing Jon, he attempted to stand, but lost his balance and tipped backwards in his chair. Jon winced as the stranger hit the stone floor, but he quickly stepped over and offered a hand. "Are you hurt?" Jon questioned, struggling to pull up the man's weight. Finally, upright, the man nodded quickly. "I'll be fine. I think I may have been too engrossed in my reading." "Probably safe to say. You don't appear to be the maester." No. I'm his steward, Samwell Tarly." Tarly, Jon mused. "Are you related to Lord Tarly of Horn Hill?" "You could say that, though he probably would not admit it," Sam answered, clearly uncomfortable. "He's my father. I'm his eldest son. Why is the heir to a great house tucked away in a library at Castle Black? My father didn't think I was fit to be his heir, so he gave me the choice of taking the Black or having a deadly accident, whichever would allow my younger brother to be the heir." Jon, slightly stunned at the story, could barely think of an appropriate response. "That may be one of the most awful things I've ever heard." "Yes, well, I don't disagree that my brother is likely to be a better lord. If it's any consolation, I doubt your father has been having an easy time of it. He serves Mace Tyrell and the Lannisters. My brother has been making their lives hell for over a year." Sam looked confused. "Who is your brother?" "Robb Stark, King in the North." "I'm Jon." "Forgive me," Sam almost begged. "I would never have been so informal if I had known, Your Grace." "You can call me Jon, Sam. There's no need to be so formal up here at the top of the world. Except perhaps for Alisa Thorne. I have a feeling he'll need to be put in his place on occasion." "May I watch when that happens?" Sam asked eagerly. "I think he plots ways to kill me daily." "Why is that?" "I'm not much of a fighter," Sam confessed. "Reading is more my strength, which Sir Alisa doesn't consider a strength at all." "We all have our roles," Jon consoled. "Speaking of roles, I was looking for your maester. I need to send a letter to my brother in Winterfell. Maester Aemon is resting in his chambers. The man is a century old, and he tires quite easily these days. I assist him with his duties. Would you be able to send a raven out with my letter?" "Of course. Let me just grab some parchment. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX." With his letter off to Winterfell, Jon finished his exploration of the Castle Black. The view from the top of the wall had been nothing but extraordinary. Forgetting all of the context around its necessity, looking out into the wild north was a worthy experience. Even Sir Alisa's grumblings next to him were not enough to ruin the sight. Jon's soldiers were now lining the top, acclimating themselves to the defenses. Jon looked down the wall's face, and he could not imagine trying to scale it. It may have been possible with only the remnants of the Night's Watch defending it, But with Jon's reinforcements, such an endeavor was unlikely to be successful, even against a much larger force of wildlings. After Jon was satisfied that things were settled for the evening, he parted from Sir Alisa and headed for the accommodations that he had been provided for his stay. Even with Sir Alisa's hostility, Jon, in his position as prince, had been afforded the use of the king's tower. Several of his men stood in front of the tower, standing guard. Making his way up to the chambers, it was plain to see it had not been used for years and hastily cleared enough to be habitable. A flickering light was visible beneath the door to the chambers. Jon was thankful enough that someone had seen fit to at least light the fire. It was even more frigid on top of the wall, and Jon's hands had barely regained feeling. The first thing he noticed upon entering was Ghost curled up beside the fire, some sort of bone stripped of flesh next. The beast barely paid him any mind. Securing the door behind him for the night, he turned and took in the rest of the room. Compared to the rest of the castle it was probably luxurious, but by most other standards it was sparse and dusty. Jon grew curious when he saw a pile of furs haphazardly abandoned on the floor. His gaze widened when he saw Ygritte's head sticking out from under the furs on the large bed, propped up against the headboard. He could just barely see bare shoulders peeking out from the covers as well. The mastery of the abandoned clothing had quickly been solved. "How did you get up here?" Jon questioned, though his eyes barely strayed from the hints of skin. "Wasn't that hard?" Ygritte grinned. "If you think your soldiers haven't figured out we've been fucking, then you're quite blind. They didn't try to stop me. Plus, I escorted your wolf. I think I've grown on him." Jon rolled his eyes. "I need more discerning guards. They can't be worse than the crows. Mans should have attacked this place years ago. Wouldn't have been much of a challenge." "Is that so?" Jon questioned, dropping his cloak next to the bed. The rest of his clothes quickly followed until he was stood bare next to the bed. As much as he worried about rumors being spread amongst the men, he pushed those thoughts for later. "What about now? Do you think Mans could take the wall from me?" Instead of answering, Ygritte slithered beneath the furs until she was laid on the edge of the bed. Her hand emerged, trailing up Jon's thigh before grasping his cock. Jon's breath caught, and the red-haired wildling grinned up at him. "No, I think you're too stubborn to lose. Even if you did, you'd take Mans and his army with you." That was probably the nicest compliment she had ever paid him, and that, along with her hand on his manhood, was enough to light a fire within him. He threw the furs aside, revealing the rest of her form. Gripping her ankles, he bodily pulled her until her legs hung over the bed. Spreading her legs, he grasped himself and entered her, claiming his wildling lover again. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX. It was late, and the sky above Winterfell was dark. Robb, like many evenings since becoming king, found himself awake. The past 3 days had been a whirlwind, and his mind raced with many emotions, such that it was unable to be turned off. Fur cloak wrapped around his otherwise bare shoulders, he walked over to the hand-carved cradle that sat a short walk from his and Margaery's bed. Hands gliding along the smooth wood, Robb looked down into his newborn son's peaceful face. Prince Cregan Stark, heir to the Northern Throne, had been born just 3 days prior, and Robb felt as if his entire world had changed. They had contemplated naming the boy after Robb's father, but the loss of Eddard Stark was still too much of a lingering presence within the halls of the castle. It would have felt like a hollow attempt at a replacement for Robb. Cregan Stark may have never been a king, but his legacy and regard in the histories of Westeros were unquestioned. It was a fitting name to live up to. Of the many changes that had occurred over the past many months, the birth of Cregan was finally one that Robb welcomed. His eyes followed the steady rise and fall of his son's chest, before straying up the rounded pink cheeks and brown wisps of hair that were closer to Margaery's brunette locks than his auburn. Tempting fate, Robb ran a fingertip gently along Cregan's cheek, but the newborn did not stir. Robb jumped when he felt an arm wrap around his middle but relaxed again when he saw his wife, hair tousled from sleep, smiling up from beside him. Robb frowned. "You should be resting. And you should sleep while you can," Margaery stated. "He'll be up soon enough for a feeding." Robb placed a kiss on her head. "I know. It just feels as if every worry I had before he was born has now increased tenfold." He's just a tiny babe, and yet our enemies would see him dead if they had the opportunity to strike such a blow. That won't happen, Margaery declared. We will not let it. No, we won't. I'll bury anyone who seeks to try, Robb promised. Yet, it does nothing to ease my mind that we have Tyrion Lannister and a host of enemies on the way to our home. Getting a raven saying the Lannisters wished to negotiate the terms of peace was a complete surprise, and Robb was nothing but mistrustful over the gesture. Robb continued, I have no personal spite against Tyrion outside of his family name, but Tywin certainly does. Should it not be seen as an insult that the man would send the source of his embarrassment as his envoy to treat with me? Instead of answering right away, Margaery took his hand and led him back to their bed. Sitting him down on the edge, she crawled behind him, wrapping her arms around his front, chin nestled into the space above his left shoulder. Her hand soothingly ran along the hardened muscle on his chest. You are a king, my love. There may be others claiming such right, but you are the only one of them who has proven themselves worthy of the title. Tywin is desperate. He knows that if you desired it, you could march on King's Landing and take it from him. You've already taken his home. It would be foolish to attempt some manner of trickery when you have retired from the battlefield to see to the well-being of your people. Were he to plot against you, in your own home, the North would unleash its full fury on him. You think my worry is uncalled for. I think you worry because you love your family. That is never uncalled for. But don't let it consume you. We will be vigilant, and take nothing for granted. No one except for Tyrion will enter Winterfell. The rest of his men will sit outside the gates, with 100 northern bows pointed at them. Should they even breathe in a threatening manner, our archers will use them for target practice. Robb reached an arm over, suddenly pulling Margaery until she sat across his knees, cradled in his arms. I think you've spent too much time amongst northerners, my love. Our savage bloodlust is beginning to take over your sweet disposition. I have to confess, it drives me mad. Margaery patted his chest. I'm afraid my body isn't ready to satisfy your brutish northern desires. Childbirth does take its toll. Robb lazily placed his lips against hers, lingering for several moments before pulling back. That will do for now. Your mother is intent on having a grand feast to celebrate Cregan's birth, Margaery stated, shifting the topic to lighter matters. I know. While I would prefer not to be frivolous with our resources, I don't see how I can refuse her the opportunity to play the proud grandmother. There is value in giving the people something to take joy in as well. I do not disagree, Robb conceded. I've also been thinking about other pressing matters. Now that we are independent, we will have to take a more active role in expanding the North's economy and trade. Our connections to King's Landing will never be the same, despite whatever peace the Lannisters may offer. It does not benefit them to help us flourish. Have you considered any plans? Robb nodded, and he could not contain some measure of excitement. We have more land than any other kingdom, yet we do not take advantage of it. We should look to cultivate it and expand our exports. The South has bustling cities with markets, and we should have the same. We need more ports, and to increase our trade across the narrow sea. It would make our long winters easier to endure. I think that it is a wise plan, Robb. And why not start close to home? An expansion of Wintertown would be a worthwhile project, more craftsmen, more trade. It would put men to work, give them purpose rather than simply hunkering down and waiting for winter to overtake them. I like the idea, Robb answered. Especially with more soldiers at Winterfell, having expanded barracks would also be prudent, rather than makeshift camps. I'll speak with Veon Poole and Maester Lewin about logistics and getting experienced builders to offer input on the matter. Robb glanced over towards Cregan, who slumbered on. It was time to consider building a legacy beyond war for his son to inherit one day. XXXXXXXXXXXX. Becoming a father had been an enlightening experience for Robb. It had brought him moments of joy and pride every time he saw little Cregan do something new, which seemed to be a constant, a new expression or noise revealing itself daily. Being back amongst his family, it had also brought about the reminder that he had young siblings who had been robbed of growing up with their father. Robb had learned and grown to be a man under the watchful eye of Eddard Stark, but Sansa, Arya, Bran, and Rickon would never have such a blessing. Robb could never fill such a hole, but he still made a more concerted effort to be such a figure for his siblings, dedicating portions of his days to spend time with them. Sansa was blooming into a woman, so there was only so much guidance and useful words he was able to provide, but still, he made the effort. Bran was still fighting through the depression of the limitations caused by his loss of mobility, but Robb did his best to involve him in talks of strategy and administration, trying his best to make him understand that a learned mind could be just as valuable as a knight. Arya and Rickon, on the other hand, were an easier duo to spend time with. Both were unstoppable forces that could barely be contained and out of mischief, so Robb knew the best place for them was the training yard. That was where they could be found almost every morning after breaking their fasts, and this particular morning was no different. Robb looked across at Arya and Rickon, each wrapped in padding and wielding their practice swords. Despite the frigid temperatures, each had eager smiles on their faces. Robb knew if he looked up in the tower overlook behind him, he would see his own mother's stern and disapproving face. Fortunately, she had not stood in the way of her children's training time, but seeing young children turn into warriors was never easy on a mother. Margaery and little Cregan were no doubt bundled up next to Lady Catelyn, and her only grandchild would be enough to keep her distracted, and her ill feelings at ease. Rickon, we'll start with you today, Robb instructed, raising his training sword. Remember what you've learned. Keeping a balanced stance is paramount. You want to defend from a position of strength. He watched as his brother took a medium step back, raising his sword. Good, now defend. Robb carefully brought his sword down in varying angles, letting Rickon get comfortable with his footwork, something that took immense concentration for a wiry young boy. Eyes up, Robb ordered, tapping Rickon on the shoulder when the boy's gaze drifted down. Never take your eyes off your opponent. If you become overwhelmed by an attack, disengage and drop back into a better position. Robb put Rickon through his paces, then turned his attention to Arya, who was practically bouncing with impatience. When do we get to hit you? Arya questioned. Robb looked at her sharply but without actual ire. You would hit your king. That does not seem wise, princess. Ah, don't call me that, Arya groaned. It's the one thing worse than a lady. Well, princesses only get to swing their swords at their king when they've proven they can defend themselves. A strong defense is the best foundation to counter from with an attack. Now are you finished complaining? No, but I'll just complain quietly to myself. Fair enough, Robb conceded. Now prepare yourself. Robb put Arya to the test, admittedly very impressed with how agile she was. She moved more comfortably than Rickon, which was no great surprise given the years she had on him. Robb pushed her harder, his strikes more forceful and less predictable. Arya took a painful blow to her thigh, but merely righted herself and prepared for the next assault. When Robb saw her stance begin to waver, he surprised her with a quick jab to the stomach, which she was unable to fend off. It sent her stumbling backward onto her backside. There were a few laughs from the other men in the training yard, which immediately ceased when Arya fixed them with a deathly glare. Robb tucked his sword under his arm, then reached a hand down to his sister. Seeing no mirth in Robb's eyes, she reluctantly let him pull her to her feet. You did well, he complimented. You killed me, Arya countered, her disappointment evident. Better a false death in the practice yard than a real one on the battlefield, Robb stated. Take the failures here as lessons, so that they will not be failures in the future. Arya frowned for a moment, clearly not liking the concept of ever failing, but nodded her head all the same. Can we go again? Before Robb could respond, he noticed Sir Roderick approaching, an intense look on his face. Unfortunately, it seems my attention is needed elsewhere. Robb turned to where several members of his Kingsguard were congregating. Daisy, would you mind taking over? The heir to Bear Island immediately strolled over. Not at all, Your Grace. She took Robb's practice sword and immediately began her instruction. Robb met Sir Roderick away from the activity. What is it? Our scouts have spotted a small Lannister host on the road to Winterfell, Your Grace. Robb's posture stiffened. You know my orders. Send a host of men to meet them. They are to escort Lord Tyrion into the castle alone. His men wait outside the walls, eyes on them at all times. Bring Lannister to meet me in the Godswood. Without waiting for Sir Roderick to respond to his commands, Robb turned and walked over to Lucas Blackwood. Your Grace. he inquired. Go to my chambers and retrieve ice. Bring it to me in the Godswood. Chapter 39, Chapter 39. Chapter text. Robb sat before Winterfell's great weirwood. His bare fingers ran along the gleaming blade of ice, admiring the smoky ripples in the Valyrian steel. He imagined the many generations of Stark lords doing the exact same. The Godswood was empty, except for Grey Wind, who was lurking somewhere among the trees. The silence of his reflections was disturbed by approaching footsteps. Robb's face hardened as he saw Tyrion Lannister, adorned in the red and gold of his house. Sir Roderick stood behind the small man, hand clearly gripping his own sword tightly. Robb dismissed the man. Thank you, Sir Roderick. You may go. The older man hesitated. Are you certain, my king? A Lannister is not to be trusted. Before Robb could respond, Tyrion interrupted. Sir Roderick, while I appreciate your faith that I would be able to somehow overcome your king,